A person thinks they will never forgive their attackers. A thunderclap is heard and lightning crosses the sky. That person is in the forest at that moment. It's raining and the drops run everywhere. A statue of a man with his hand extended toward the sky. The boy couldn't move. He wondered how much time had passed. He questioned if this was his end. There were too many questions in his mind due to panic and fear. The boy remembers how other kids at school stood in front of him mocking and asking why the school needed him. Since he had a useless ability, all his days at school were like that. The boy remembers how the only person close to him at school told him she was tired of pretending to be his friend at that moment. The boy felt terrible. He never suspected that even someone close was deceiving him. Someone decided to test their new magic on him, and thus the boy became an immobile statue. He couldn't move when he was turned to stone. The boy froze and couldn't understand how much time had passed since then. He couldn't keep track of time, because he always thought about all the events that had happened to him. The boy gritted his teeth and repeated over and over that he hated everyone and everything. He couldn't take it anymore and decided he would survive. He was very determined. He was wrapped in a strong inner war when he decided he needed to take revenge on all his attackers. He swore he wouldn't let them rest until they got what they deserved. His attackers had done many horrible things some time ago. The boy was at Centark Magic School. At that school, heroes were trained to defeat the Demon King who attacked villages and eliminated heroes. The kids at the school learned magic of various types. Each had some specific type of ability, be it invisibility, shield, fire creation. Among others, there was a huge variety of skills. There was a crowd of teenagers right in the schoolyard. A red-haired boy mocked a black-haired boy. The redhead punched the boy in the stomach and asked when he would leave the school. He was very aggressive. The boy fell to the ground and started to get up with difficulty, holding his stomach. The boy's name was Abel. He was precisely the one who was constantly mocked by other students for not standing out. He had no abilities. The redhead started shouting that they studied at the greatest magic school. That place was an institution for the true elite. The redhead raised his fists, saying there was no place there for someone weak and without a decent ability like Abel. The boy closed his eyes, waiting for the blow, but the redhead's fist struck against a shield that appeared right in front of young Abel. He relaxed for a second, feeling safe. The blonde caught everyone's attention. He asked if everyone in that school really aspired to become heroes. He wanted to know if the students training to be the heroes behaved with dignity. The name of the blonde one was Stark. He was the one who created the shield right in front of Abel. Everyone shouted upon seeing the boy. Abel tried to catch his breath, while the other students screamed insults and walked away. Stark reached out to help Abel get up from the ground. Abel thanked the boy, and Stark replied that anyone would have done the same. Stark invited Abel to climb to the school roof. Stark and Abel were sitting on the roof. Stark asked why Abel wasn't responding. Abel laughed. Stark expected a very different reaction. He watched the boy. Abel said that the bullies were right, that his ability was useless. Stark asked if the boy really had the decoding ability. Abel closed his eyes and confirmed that his spiritual ability was decoding. Even when activating it, nothing happened. Only a strange white screen appeared in the boy's mind. Abel said there was no mention of that ability in the school library. Nothing was known about it. No document, book, or article explaining what that ability did. Abel remembers how he got that ability by accident. When he captured his spirit in the forest as a child. After that, his life went on normally, and he took no action. Abel said he didn't want to be a hero. He didn't need it. Stark reflected and said he believed Abel's ability wasn't that simple. There was something special about it. Abel doubted it. He couldn't believe that his ability would be useful someday, somewhere. Abel talked about a promise he made to his childhood friend, that he would return home when he graduated from school. He would go back to the village. Stark asked what kind of girl he was talking about. Stark placed his hand on the boy's shoulder and said he wanted to form a team with him to become adventurers. He believed that together they could defeat monsters. Abel sighed and said that was definitely impossible at that moment. Abel believed he could always trust his friend Star. It was a clear and sunny day that didn't foreshadow anything bad, but the fateful day arrived anyway. A man dressed in white stepped onto the stage in front of a huge crowd of students to announce very important news. The man in white informed that a vision had been granted to them the day before. All the students were intrigued by the news. Since it was about the vision, the man informed that the school council had decided to choose a group of heroes who would challenge the Demon King and defeat him. All the students were shocked. Abel couldn't believe it either. He thought Stark was perfect for the role of squad member. The man continued saying that the following heroes would be sent. The hero is Black Mage, Lala, Paladin, Aiden, the Masked Warrior, Gorgon were chosen to be the ones who would defeat the Demon King. Many of those students were already quite capable heroes who managed to showcase their best qualities. They had exceptional skills and real chances of winning. Abel was glad that Stark had been chosen as one of those to face the Demon King. Stark was perfect for that role. Besides, the boy wanted to prove his skills for a long time. Then the man continued and informed that Abel would be the last to go with the decoding ability. The boy was stunned. He couldn't believe he had been called. He thought he had misheard. Many students wondered why he was chosen. They believed his ability was useless. Someone in the crowd asked what he could be useful for. All the announced names were equipped and prepared. For battle, the next morning they were already on their way to defeat the Demon King. They were sure the vision couldn't have deceived them. All the named students were heading toward the Demon King's fortress. Abel walked at the back. He really didn't want to participate in something like that, but he still needed to. Abel thought it was completely useless. He wondered why he had been chosen. He considered fleeing before it was too late. Otherwise, he might not survive encountering monsters or the Demon King himself. Abel turned to Stark and tried to tell him his decision to leave. Abel hoped for Stark's understanding, since he had always been by his side and supported him. One could say he was his only friend at school. But Stark coldly struck the boy. Abel didn't understand what happened. Stark grabbed him by the collar and said the boy must address him as a gentleman. Abel was terrified. He no longer saw the same friendly boy he had been with on the rooftop not long before. Stark let him go to the ground and told him not to touch him. Judge Stark revealed that he helped Abel just to be chosen in the group of heroes now that the mission began. Stark stated he would treat the boy completely differently. Stark said he simply couldn't stand weak. People declared that the game of pretending friendship was over. Abel cried and couldn't believe what he heard. He thought they were friends, or at least good acquaintances from that moment on. The difficulties began. Since Abel was useless in combat, he carried all the luggage and was used as a human shield in battles. Abel was also used to check for traps. The other group members never missed the chance to laugh at him. Everyone believed Abel was superfluous in the team since his ability was useless, both on the front line and in the support role. Stark yelled at the boy, saying he moved too slowly, claimed the boy only served to carry things. They decided to punish him by leaving him to sleep on the street. Abel felt very downcast when they decided to leave him outside. Stark said everyone was going to play at the casino. All the students were happy while Abel was left alone on the street, but no one paid him any attention. All the heroes simply left the young man with his things near a tree. Abel wondered, why is he being treated so terribly? He doesn't understand what he did to deserve this. He never touched anyone and always behaved appropriately. But even so, they mocked him. Abel still wonders why he was chosen for the heroes group. The vision seemed very strange, only because of the presence of the bird. He didn't understand what its role was in all of this. Suddenly, thunder rumbles and lightning flashes right in front of the students. A creature appears. With a predatory smile, it asks if those students are the heroes sent to confront it. Stark can't react, shocked by the appearance. They weren't even halfway to the Demon King's fortress, so they weren't prepared for battle, especially against such a serious opponent. A strategy was needed. At that moment, the creature continues, saying that it's a waste of time. It's really not in the mood to fight, especially against students. That's not even the level of the Demon King. All the heroes can't believe that the Demon King Endaro appeared right in front of them. They had never seen him in person and didn't know what to expect from him. But the students were certain that the Demon King knew many spells. The Demon King smiled ravenously while Abel looked at him horrified from that moment on. His hatred burned like hellfire. Stark tried to clear his throat. He couldn't believe in his defeat. Since he had been chosen as the selected one, he considered himself part of the elite after all. He was one of the strongest heroes in the school and had good magical skills. The Demon King managed to defeat all the heroes. Everyone was unconscious. Some began to regain consciousness, but they couldn't even get up from their knees to continue fighting or retreat and go back to school. Stark was kneeling before him and now had an idea of what a demon's kick was. He hadn't expected any of the heroes to still be able to fight. They just wanted to go home. Abel crawled on the ground, looking at the Demon King in shock, not understanding. How could they have found him halfway? The boy was terrified. He didn't want to meet his end there. The Demon King floated in the air. He brought his hand to his chin and asked if those students were really heroes. To him, they seemed very weak and incapable of anything. He expected at least some resistance. The Demon King says that the students were too weak. He didn't even get to have fun, so he decides to try a new magic on the students that turns everyone to stone. The students create shields to protect themselves from the impact, but the shields don't help much since the Demon King's magic is stronger. Abel screams upon seeing a huge magical lightning bolt approaching as he rushes towards the boy. Stark turns and sees Abel. Pushing him down under the lightning, Abel's whole body becomes covered by a hard layer and freezes like a statue. The boy can't move or make any sound. He can only watch as Stark approaches. Stark leans over Abel, then quickly stands up and runs away, giving the boy a thumbs up for doing a great job. He orders everyone to run, and the heroes obey, all retreating with hopes of returning to school. They try to survive the demon while the Demon Lord watches the students running with disgust. He can't believe these are heroes. The Demon King loses interest in them and decides to head home. Abel stands frozen like a statue, trying to understand what's happening to him. The boy is terrified. Since he couldn't move, he was petrified. He tried to calm himself but was unsuccessful, thinking Stark and the other students would return soon to save him. He didn't even understand why he still believed in that. After everything he experienced during the group journey, he remembers how Stark and all the other students looked at him with disdain. He grits his teeth, realizing they wouldn't come back to save him. He was sure of that since they fled. Abel decides he needs to deal with everything on his own. Suddenly, a huge screen with inscriptions appears right in front of him. He looks at the screen in awe. He understands this is a spiritual ability. He's trying to figure out what's happening. The boy touches the screen and wonders where all this text came from. After all, there was nothing before, just a white flash and nothing else. That's when his ability awakened. The boy notices the inscription, **** Gorgon's pet magic, ****. He realizes that's exactly the same spell that turned him to stone. The boy starts to suspect that this is the Demon King's magic. By activating abilities, Abel can learn its formula. The boy understands that if he can decipher the formula, he can eliminate the petrification and use that spell for his own purposes, but it's not that simple. Deciphering the Demon King's complex magic formula is difficult. With the bird's magic power, it will undoubtedly be a long process. Besides, he's doing this for the first time. Abel can't decipher another line or his magical energy will run out. He will lose consciousness, and the characters on the screen clearly exceed 10,000. That number is way too big. He is going to lose consciousness, but he stands up again to keep deciphering. The boy was very tired as he kept repeating that ritual from time to time, but the volume of his magical power had grown. The boy was very tense, as the task was clearly not easy. He took off his shirt and fell to the ground, cursing because he didn't understand why he had agreed to go to the Demon King's realm. He didn't want to go with a group of heroes who hated him. The boy looked at the medallion and remembered Saida, a girl from the village. He recalled how she handed him the medallion and asked him to take it. Since it had a protective function, the girl asked the boy to return as soon as possible. The boy clenched his teeth in tension. I just wanted a peaceful life. I couldn't accept that Stark had left me alone. I thought he was my only true friend. But in the end, he turned out to be a traitor. A lot of time had passed, and the boy felt like he was going crazy. He had unhealthy thoughts, not knowing how much time had passed or if he should keep deciphering the spell. The boy clenched his fist and decided he would take revenge on his aggressors. He resolved to do it, even if it took decades. He would get out of there and seek his vengeance in the end. The boy lost track of time, deciphering the spell. From time to time, Abel stared intensely at the symbols. Only the last character remained, which, after a few seconds, was also deciphered like all the others. It seemed his work was done, and something was about to happen. The decoding was complete. The boy's screen began to shine, and Abel was blinded by a bright light. When he opened his eyes, the boy woke up in the real world. He was still standing in the field, not moving. Suddenly, the boy began to feel the hard armor on his body disintegrating. He felt freer as the armor completely broke down. The boy stood up and looked up at the sky. He looked at the sky and enjoyed the moment of liberation from captivity. He was thinking about what to do next when his thoughts were suddenly interrupted. The boy heard someone screaming. Someone was asking for help. He turned and saw a red-haired girl. She was trying to escape from the monsters. She was screaming and trying to run faster, but it was clear she had no strength left. One of the monsters called the others' attention to Abel. They all turned to the boy and stared at him. One of the monsters saw Abel, and licking its lips, thought he would taste better, so it decided to eat him instead of the girl. Another monster growled, saying it would accept any human, and they continued, chasing the girl to savor her flavor. When the monsters began to stretch their hands toward her, she screamed and cried, realizing she had been captured. The girl thought her end had come. But suddenly, a bright light emerged behind the monsters, blinding them all and forcing them to stop. For a moment, everyone was frozen, unable to move. They all turned into statues that couldn't move. Thus, the boy interrupted the pursuit. The monster had no time to catch the girl. As she turned to stone, the girl looked at the monster in surprise, trying to understand what was happening. Understanding took time because a second ago, she had been on the brink of death. The monster looked at the boy. It realized he was using the Demon King's magic and was trying to understand how the boy could use petrification, as it's a very complex spell used only by the Demon King. The monsters surrounded the boy, and one of them asked how he managed to use such complex spells. Another monster said that only the Demon King was capable of using spells like that. One of the monsters flew and, forming seals with its hands, began to attack with fire, yelling at the boy that he wouldn't be able to dodge the attack. The monster attacked randomly without even trying to aim in any way. Abel created a shield and protected himself from the blazing attack. The boy managed to hide from the strikes for a while, leaving the monster stunned. He didn't understand why his attack didn't work. After all, he had used his most powerful spell. He wanted to try attacking the young man again, but was interrupted. The boy began using the petrification spell. Once again, the monsters screamed and tried to flee, but it was already too late. Abel had already used the spell. The monsters couldn't believe that Abel was not only capable of using the Demon King's magic, but also blocking their spells. They were astonished as all the monsters were turned to stone. They tried to understand who that boy was. At that moment, Abel understood how his decoding ability worked. First of all, it allows him to break down and cancel the magical formula of spells. That's a quite useful ability. Secondly, The decoding ability allows him to use the decoded magic on his own. After deciphering the complex magic of the Demon King, Abel began to easily and quickly decipher common magic. That's why the magic of lower demons no longer poses a threat to Abel, and he can easily decipher it, and then use it against them, allowing him to face anyone. His magical power reserves grew due to the fact that it constantly drained him during the decoding of the Demon King's spell. He managed to reach incredible heights thanks to his efforts with decoding. Abel became perhaps the most powerful wizard in the world. He could currently decipher any spell and make it his own. With that ability, he can defeat the Demon King himself. With that power, the young man will be able to reach incredible heights and take revenge on his aggressors. A girl approached Abel while fleeing from some monsters, stopping right in front of the young man and thanked him for saving her. The girl was very happy to have been rescued since she still had relatives in the village. The young man looked at the girl and after a second said he had a question. He asked where the heroes were. At that moment, he was trying to gather all the possible information to find them. The girl initially didn't understand which heroes he was talking about, but then she remembered and said she heard a story about how the Demon King captured them all. But that happened 20 years ago. The young man couldn't believe that 20 years had passed. He stood in shock. After a second, he turned around and asked if it was true that he had been trapped in stone. For 20 years, a girl was running down the path, turning and signaling for the young man to follow her. She informs him that they should soon arrive at the village. The girl decides to get the young man's attention, so she calls him by his name. At that moment, the young man looks grimly at the ground beneath his feet and walks distractedly behind the girl. The young man was overwhelmed by his feelings. He was truly surprised when the girl he saved told him that it had been 20 years since the heroes lost to the Demon King and fled somewhere. The world was under the control of the Demon King. Most of the survivors became slaves of the Demon King's army or, in rare cases, lived on the outskirts of the land. Everyone ran and tried to hide from the Demon King's army. Many people had to hide in different corners as the monsters searched all around. People couldn't believe that the heroes had fled and left everyone to their fate. The girl abruptly turns to the young man and says she forgot completely to introduce herself. She said her name was Lala and then thanked him again for saving her. Layla says she can't believe Abel is so strong. She thinks he is one of the heroes. The girl hopes that the hero will help her in her village. Maybe he can protect her from the monsters again. Suddenly, the girl asks if Abel is part of the hero group and the young man yells. Startling the girl, he asks how she could think he was from a group of heroes. He doesn't want to be included among that group of terrible and vain people. Layla hides behind the cave and apologizes. She says she didn't mean to offend the young man. The young man sighs as he didn't expect to scare the girl so much, but it really hurt him. To remember the heroes, Abel puts his hand on his chin and apologizes to the girl. He admits that he lost control due to his tense state. The young man says he doesn't want to hear anything more about the hero group. The girl immediately agrees, jumps out from where she was hiding, and apologizes. She approaches the young man to look at his face and see if he has calmed down or is still irritated. Then the young man becomes serious again and asks the girl to stop and decides to ask another question. Abel remembers that the girl said there was one of the members of the hero group in her village. The girl turns and smiling says, that's true if she remembers correctly. That hero is named Gorgon from the clan of dwarves. It was Gorgon who came to her village and helped them for a while. The young man remembers a short guy with red hair who lived with a mocking smile. Abel recognizes him immediately. He is horrified. The dwarf was not the most pleasant creature in their group. The young man remembers when, during one of the breaks, the dwarf approached him and punched him in the stomach while he was trying to catch his breath. The dwarf mocked him. He was very cruel. The dwarf turned to the young man and told him not to be discouraged. The dwarf said his name and claimed that he wouldn't abandon him and would train him until he became a strong hero. But his training methods were unhealthy, that they only made the young man's situation worse. At that moment, the young man screamed in pain and asked what all of this meant. It seemed to him that the dwarf's method was not like normal training. The training sessions were too brutal, and the young man took a long time to recover from them. At that moment, the dwarf demanded that Abel be silent. He didn't want to hear excuses. He just wanted the young man to endure all the hits and stay quiet, believing that would make him strong. The dwarf raised his voice and said that the heroes group was only for the strongest. He believed that those weaker than him had no right to speak. He didn't think Abel was worth anything in the team. The dwarf asked if the young man understood him. He needed a clear answer, and the unquestionable fulfillment of his orders. He demanded that the young man get up and practice his punches at that moment. All the other group members looked at the dwarf and Abel with disdain. It was the dwarf among all the heroes who most frequently turned Abel into his punching bag, training his hits on the boy. He wouldn't stop and constantly approached to test his strength and endurance once more. The boy would never forget his face, his brown eyes, and the mocking smile that never left his face. He remembered with horror the appearance of the dwarf who had tormented him. He wanted to take revenge on him for all the suffering caused. Abel remembers that the dwarf had no warrior's eyes, but the eyes of someone who enjoys mocking the weak. Abel suspects that the dwarf liked to see the weaker ones squirm before him. Abel is very tense from the memories that invade him. Lala has been trying to bring him back to consciousness all this time. She was asking him if the boy was okay. The girl leaned in and smiled at the boy. Abel couldn't say a word at first, but then he gave a monosyllabic answer to her question. The boy turned around and noticed that the sun was about to set. The girl suggested spending the night on the street, since they had not yet reached the village. They were close to the village, but it was worth taking a break. Abel said that there were many monsters hunting at night. He reminded the girl that they shouldn't let their guard down if they didn't want to fall into a trap or be devoured by monsters. Abel and Lala were sitting around the fire trying to warm up. It was already night outside, so they decided to make a stop. It didn't make sense to continue on the path since monsters could attack them. Besides, they needed to rest. The boy asked how she had come so far from her own village. The girl said she wanted to gather medicinal herbs for the villagers. Her mother tried to stop her, but there was nothing left around the village. Then, the boy reflected on that and still decided to ask Lala how Gorgon had ended up in her village. He wondered if the dwarf was really fulfilling his duty as the hero was just hiding. The girl looked at the fire with a smile and said that Gorgon was considered a bodyguard in the village. She recounted how Gorgon protected the village from monsters. Abel should have guessed it. He thought Gorgon just hid in the village, and now he lives there peacefully. Gorgon isn't the type of dwarf who would risk his life to save others, so Lala asked the boy why he was looking for the members of the hero group. The boy sighed and said that it was none of her business. He didn't want to reveal his motives. Besides, they had just met, and he shouldn't trust her yet. Lala asked if she could try to guess. Lala smiled and said she would be able to get it right on the first try. She assumed that Abel wanted to defeat the Demon King. She thought the boy would gather all the surviving heroes and start a rebellion against the Demon King. The girl argued that if the boy joined the heroes, the days of the Demon King's reign would be numbered. She believed that a group of heroes could defeat the Demon King and bring peace back to the people. The boy's eyes widened in surprise, and he gritted his teeth in anger. He turned around, abruptly, turning his back to the girl, and demanded that she put out the fire since he was going to sleep. The girl didn't ask unnecessary questions, and did as he requested. She took a pot of water and poured it directly over the fire, and then he lay back down in the sleeping bag. The boy lay there staring at the wall at that moment. He didn't care about the Demon King. His main goal was to get revenge on the heroes who betrayed him and ran away like cowards. He would never forgive them for that. The boy needed strength for his goal. He looked at his hand and thought about how he would make the heroes pay for their actions. Overall, his ability no longer seemed so useless. He wanted them to feel the same horror and fear he felt at the moment of petrification. Abel believed that the heroes deserved the same fate as him for everything they did. The boy thought he only managed to escape thanks to his useless ability. He never expected that ability to save him, since there was no information about it and he never used it. At one moment, hanging from the boy's neck was a pendant given to him by a girl from the village. At that moment, Lala was asleep and had no idea that the boy had exactly the same pendant as her. The boy still hadn't noticed the pendant, so he had no idea of the bond between Lala and Seda. In the afternoon, Lala and Abel set off again. The girl informed the boy that they were almost at the right place. He couldn't wait to finally return to the village. The girl said they just needed to climb the mountain to see the entire village and the way down to it. That way, they could quickly reach home and see their mother. When the girl got up, she stopped at the edge of the path, exclaiming. The boy didn't understand what surprised her. He only saw how she looked at the village in horror and opened her mouth, trying to say something. Lala asked Abel to look towards the village. Abel complied and was also shocked. He wondered what had happened to the village. It was all in flames and ruins. People and monsters were running around everywhere. The girl screamed in horror, asking what was happening. She saw people running and screaming. She couldn't believe that monsters were attacking her village. Lala was very worried about her husband. The girl, alongside Abel, approached a boy who was apparently hurt. The girl leaned towards him and asked if he was okay and what was happening. The boy was injured. He gathered all his strength to respond and then explained that the Demon King's army had attacked the village. He said an army of demons had come for Gorgon. They were looking for a hero. The girl couldn't believe it. She wondered what it all meant and where Gorgon was. She thought the hero was supposed to save them, but he was hiding somewhere while everyone else tried to escape. Abel suddenly heard someone scream and turned around. He saw demons growling and raising their weapons to attack the villagers. They liked to mock people. The demons were laughing. One of them tried to apologize for the fact that they all had come to the village. Another demon laughed and said they would get a promotion for capturing someone from the hero's group. An elderly woman was sitting on the ground, comforting a child who was in her lap while the grandmother said to protect the grandson. The child screamed in horror. He was very afraid of the demons attacking his village. The demon raised his weapon, speaking negatively about the grandmother. He was about to stab the defenseless victims, swinging his weapon and almost hitting them, but at that moment, something stopped him right between the demon and the grandmother with the appearance of Abel, who used a petrification spell. He managed to turn the demon to stone, freezing him before he could touch his victims. All the demons were shocked. The grandmother and her grandson also didn't understand what was happening. The monsters looked at Abel and tried to figure out who he was. They were furious that a regular boy dared to interfere with them during the attack on the village. The monsters attacked the villagers while they screamed and begged for help. One of the monsters ran towards the orc, bowed, and reported that they had received reinforcements. The orc asked what had happened. All the monsters decided to attack Abel. The most important monster, with a scar, was holding a cage with a hostage in his hand. At first, he didn't react to the news about a mere boy who was ruining their attack. The orc looked at the boy and asked if he was really capable of defeating his monsters. He said his subordinates were useless, since they couldn't defeat a simple boy. The boy looked worriedly at the monster upon seeing that skeletal Gorgon was sitting inside the cage. The dwarf was in very bad shape. He did not try to free himself from the calm. In the cage, Gorgon had already resigned himself to his fate. He saw the boy and shouted in surprise. He didn't expect to see Abel again. The boy said that the hero had changed a lot and asked if he had been on a diet. Gorgon was sweating from the effort. Drops of sweat fell down his face as he tried to understand how Abel had survived. He was deeply shocked by the unexpected appearance of that student whom he and the heroes had left on the battlefield against the Demon King. The orc lifted the cage with Gorgon and asked if they really knew Abel. He was interested. He could use that information to his advantage. The orc wouldn't mind capturing another hero for a reward. The orc turned to Abel and asked if the boy knew that Gorgon had tried to escape again. Despite being a member of the hero group, he looked at Gorgon with contempt and then turned his gaze back to Abel and continued. The orc said that Gorgon didn't even try to fight. He just surrendered to save his own life. He was sure that Gorgon didn't deserve the title of hero because he was an ordinary coward. Gorgon looked at the monster. He laughed and asked what the problem was with his escape. He smiled and saw nothing wrong with what he had done. Gorgon said he only cared about his own life. For him, that was a reasonable position. Gorgon shouted to Abel that he didn't know how the boy had survived. But in his opinion, Abel had no right to judge him. Abel looked grimly at Gorgon. He assumed that the hero was indeed a coward who only knew how to mock others. Abel turned to the monster and asked why he needed Gorgon. He proposed a deal. Abel would let all the monsters go if the orc released Gorgon. The boy didn't want to fight. The orc struck the spot where Abel was standing and said he didn't like the way the kid was talking to him. The monster asked if the boy really thought he could defeat him and his subordinates. Abel dodged the blow. Meanwhile, the orc continued and said that a man like Abel didn't have a drop of strength to overcome him, not even among the entire Demon King's army. He was the only orc capable of using magic. The orc formed a seal and launched a magical dragon towards Abel. The boy created a shield with his skill and protected himself with it. Abel closed his eyes and told the orc that the only thing he could be proud of was his magic. The boy then appeared again in front of a huge screen with spell text and managed to decipher a new spell. He extended his hand and formed the seal. His hands ignited with green fire. A second later, a huge green magical dragon shot out from his hand towards the orc. The orc was paralyzed with surprise because the boy used exactly the same spell as he did. The orc watched in amazement as the magical dragon approached. He was sweating from the effort and couldn't say a word, much less counterattack. The dragon was too fast and powerful. A second later, a loud scream was heard from the orc that couldn't dodge and fell directly under the dragon's attack. The orcs didn't expect such a powerful attack, which is why they were defeated at the start of the battle. Gorgon. He clung to the bars of the cage and screamed because the orc had released the cage, which flew abruptly toward Abel, and he caught it with one hand, holding it over his head. Gorgon calmed down for a second as Abel lowered the pressure cage and apologized to the orc. He didn't want to fight him. The boy wanted to resolve everything peacefully, but circumstances forced him into the fight. He felt disappointed with that outcome, saying that the orc was no match for him. Gorgon was still holding the bars with his hands and looking at the boy. Astonished, he couldn't believe that the boy had become so strong. He remembered that Abel had a useless ability. Gorgon was left speechless, surprised. He looked at the spot where the orc had been and only saw an empty space covered in dust. The orc had vanished with just one attack from the bird. It was too powerful. He wondered if that was really the useless bird. Gorgon smiled greedily, hoping to convince the young man to help him. He thought that with Abel's help, he could ensure his safety. All the monsters fled the village in panic. They screamed in fear and tried to avoid Abel's gaze since their leader was defeated with just one magic spell. Suddenly, Abel was called by Gorgon. The young man looked at him seriously and saw that the man was still sitting in the cage, bowing before the boy. Trying to please him to free himself, he acknowledged Abel's strength and said that his power knew no limits. He hadn't expected the boy to become so strong. He said he remembered him completely differently, but that he had changed. Gorgon tries to convince Abel that he has opened his eyes to a man and that he now sees the true strength of a student. He claimed he saw potential in the young man during the joint campaign against the Demon King, even though Abel was not impressed. He looks at the man who bends before him. Gorgon continues and asks him to forgive his rudeness, calling Abel a true hero once again. Gorgon looks up and asks Abel to show leniency, promising that he will be loyal to the boy for the rest of his life. He believes he has managed to calm the young man and that he will now be freed. The sharp sound of the iron bars is heard. Abel breaks the cage's bars and tightens his hands around Gorgon's throat. The dwarf tenses up and starts to choke. The young man squeezes his throat even harder, and the dwarf begins to cough. Abel speaks negatively about the dwarf, raising his voice and asking if he at least doesn't feel ashamed of his own behavior. He is surprised by such audacity. Abel doesn't consider Gorgon a true hero. Abel is very angry. He reminds Gorgon that the dwarf had mocked him, looking him up and down. The young man is outraged because the dwarf decided to ask clemency after all the damage he caused. Tears accumulate in the corners of Gorgon's eyes. He merely emits a whistle, taken by fear. He didn't recognize Abel. The young man seemed very furious and cruel. Although he hadn't dared to say anything to the heroes before, Abel tightens the gnome's throat even further and demands that he give him information about the rest of the group. Abel tells him that if the dwarf shares the information, he might forgive him, but he doesn't promise anything. He assures the dwarf that he should at least say something, otherwise it will be the end. Gorgon asks if the young man will really forgive him if he reveals information about the other heroes. Gorgon is very afraid for his life. He doesn't want to leave the world of the living. Besides, this wasn't how he imagined the end of his life. After a few seconds, Gorgon begins to tell everything he knows about the heroes and where they are. Abel listens attentively. Without interrupting, he waits for the right moment to take revenge on his attackers after the story. Gorgon smiles and lets out a contained laugh, asking if Abel will let him go now that he has told everything. The dwarf thinks Abel is still the same weak and pathetic boy who will decide to let him go. Abel lowers his head and says he will fulfill part of the terms of their agreement. Then he raises his head, tightening Gorgon's throat even more with his hands. He says he will spare his life, but with one condition. The young man then uses his new spell and opens the seal. Behind the man, Gorgon gets scared, not realizing immediately that his body is being covered by a stone armor. Gorgon screams in fear and asks what the young man is doing. Abel looks at him coldly and tells him that he can take advantage. Lala tries to stop the young man, but she doesn't make it in time, and Abel, at that moment, tells Gorgon that he will never forget what the heroes did to him while Gorgon freezes into stone. The young man talks about how he longed for the day of his revenge while Gorgon was petrified. The girl looks horrified at the young man, not believing he has become such a cruel person. Abel finally says it's too late for Gorgon to apologize. The young man smiles with disdain and says the dwarf must feel what he felt. Meanwhile, part of Gorgon's face was still visible in the stone. His expression was one of pure terror. He tried to move his arm, but nothing happened. His body was completely covered by a stone armor and he became paralyzed. The stone statue of Gorgon fell to the ground. Abel just watched it. All the villagers came out of their hiding places and looked, horrified at what had happened to Gorgon. A villager tried to run towards him, worried, but a man stopped her. He looked at Abel, who had expelled the Demon King's army. Abel heard a woman running towards Lala, who was shouting with joy because her daughter had survived. She started asking her daughter if everything was okay. Lala felt very happy to see her mother. Then, Abel turned around and was surprised. He saw his childhood friend who had now apparently grown up. She was Lala's mother. The young man froze and stared in shock at his old friend Abel. He started to approach the woman and asked her if her name was Seta. The woman recognized Abel immediately and got emotional. She ran toward the young man and asked if it was really him. She asked where he had been all this time. The young man couldn't say a word. The woman began to cry and reached out to him, saying it had been a long time since they last saw each other and that she wanted to talk to him about many things. At that moment, the young man remembered when before going to school, Sira gave him the medallion and asked him to come back as soon as possible. Sira was Abel's only close friend. At that time, he constantly thought about returning to her. The woman reached out to him. Abel kept his head down the whole time he took out the medallion and returned it to his childhood friend. Apologizing for not keeping his promise, Abel turned and went to find the heroes. He no longer wanted to see his childhood friend. Because he couldn't keep his word, he could no longer live like a normal person. While Seta and Lala watched the young man walk away, Abel moves on and decides he will use his abilities to take revenge on the heroes and the Demon King. He is determined as he will still have to face many unpleasant acquaintances. Lala watches the young man intently and then suddenly runs after him. The mother calls out to her daughter, but Lala doesn't listen and keeps running. Lala doesn't want to let the young man go like that, because he saved her life and that of the village. Lala runs straight toward the boy. A blonde girl watches all of this through a magic orb. She sees that Abel is alive and isn't very happy about it. She thought he was still turned to stone. Standing in the middle of a vast field, the girl sits on the throne. Holding several chained people, she smiles ravenously and decides that Abel will be her next toy. She can't just set aside an old acquaintance. Abel managed to protect Layla's village from the orc army. He had no intention of doing something like that, but circumstances forced him to save the inhabitants. But the most important thing is that Abel managed to take revenge on one of the members of the hero group, Gorgon, one of the most unpleasant dwarves he had ever met in his life. The boy felt no pity for the dwarf. He believed Gorgon deserved his fate. Now he had to find the others. He was already on his way to the next target. Gorgon had told him enough information about the others. Heroes that Abel needed to settle scores with. The sun shone outside. The boy walked along a sunny path. Located right next to a lake. Overall, the atmosphere was very calm and peaceful, so he simply moved on. Suddenly, Abel heard some noises behind him. Layla was running after him, shouting and demanding that he stop. The girl was out of breath and tired, but she still managed to catch up to him and tried to stop him. The boy looked at her, not understanding why she was following him. After all, he had saved Layla's village and its inhabitants. The girl should have stayed with her mother instead of going out on another dangerous adventure. The boy turns around and stops. The girl runs up to Abel and kneels with her hands on her knees to catch her breath. She says that she finally managed to catch up with him. She thought she wouldn't have time. Abel asks why she ran after him. Layla presses her hand against her chest and says she will go with him. She looks at him with determination. Waiting for his reaction, she will do everything possible to make him accept her. The boy watches her incredulously, not understanding why she should follow him. After all, he has his own goals. Besides, Abel doesn't believe that Layla can help him in combat in any way. Abel refuses, explaining that his journey will be long and dangerous. Children have no place on his journey. He believes the girl would only get in the way and cause problems. Abel shouts for her to go back home, but Layla responds to the shouts, refusing to leave. She stands her ground. Layla tries to justify her presence on the journey. The boy watches her closely. He asks what happened to her, why she suddenly decided to accompany him. He says he took her home and that should have been enough. Layla falls silent for a moment. Then she says that she felt if she let him go, he would be alone for the rest of his life. She doesn't want him to be lonely because he saved her life and that of the inhabitants. The girl takes the boy's hand and says she can't let him go. She looks at him again, surprised. Layla hands him the medallion and pressing her hand against her chest, she says she needs to make sure he returns to her mother. The boy remembers Sita's worry and becomes serious again. He turns around and says that Layla can do whatever she wants. The girl initially just looks at him and then smiles, saying that's exactly what she will do. Layla and Abel continue their way through the forest, climbing over stones. At that moment, the girl asks why they need to climb the mountain. She was very tired after trying to catch up with him, and now she felt even more exhausted by the steep ascent. Suddenly, wolves appear at the top. The girl gets scared and the boy stops. The wolves bare their teeth. The girl remains frozen with fear. She waits for the moment the wolves will attack. One of them advances growling, trying to reach her. Layla screams in fear. She didn't know where to run as it wasn't easy to go down or up the mountain. The wolf was very fast and Abel manages to place himself in front of the girl and uses a seal with the help of a spell. He transforms the wolf into stone. Everyone freezes for a moment, but soon the other wolves attack again. The boy uses the spell once more and turns the rest into stone as a result. The predators couldn't reach the girl. Once again, Layla is saved by Abel. The girl feels useless for not being able to do anything. During the attack, Abel turns around and sees Layla, who is watching him in horror as he used another spell against the wolves. At that moment, the girl screams and runs away in fear. The boy continues using the petrification spell on the wolves while the girl ran back and forth screaming in terror. He watches Layla flee from a small monster that looked like a bird, but he couldn't help her right away since he was still dealing with the rest of the monsters and animals encountered along the way. That's why the girl spent most of her time just running and screaming. At the end of the day, when it was already dark, Layla and Abel decided to take a break. They arrived at a small clearing where they could sit and rest a bit. Abel helped Layla start the fire. They both sat close to the fire that warmed and illuminated the clearing. The girl and the boy remained silent, sitting around the fire for a while. Layla was sitting on a log and looked very dejected. She felt useless. Abel tried to calm her down. He said she didn't need anyone else to fight. He was confident he could handle everything alone. The girl lamented, disappointed. It wasn't what she wanted to hear. The boy lowered his head and closed his eyes. He said it would be better if she returned to the village since the journey would be difficult and dangerous. She could get hurt. The girl lowered her head thoughtfully. But suddenly, she stands up and smiles, because she has an idea that could make the journey easier. The girl suddenly fills with joy, places her hand on her chest and smiling, says that Abel could teach her magic. That way, she wouldn't interrupt him in the fights against the monsters. Maybe she could even help in some way. The young man doesn't share the enthusiasm, looks at her with his serious expression and tells her he doesn't want to do something so tedious, especially during the journey they were facing together. Layla grabs the young man's hand and tells him that if he teaches her magic, she will still be useful during the fight. She believes she can at least protect him while she's in the back. Lala looks confused for a moment, but still asks him this. The young man, after much insistence, finally agrees to become the girl's teacher. He will teach her magic. He has no idea how he will do it, but he will manage to teach her basic skills. The girl thanks the young man and jumps for joy. He just sighs tired. He didn't expect to have to train someone else during the journey. Abel considered this an extra headache. Then the young man decides to say that what really seems to him strange is the fact that Lala asked him to become a teacher. Lala says she will do her best, she is determined, but the young man admits that Lala's enthusiasm captivated him, still thinks that Lala's training could bring some positive results. Abel gets up from his seat and ends the conversation by putting out the fire. They decide to go to sleep to rest well before a tough day. Abel and Lala lie down in sleeping bags and fall asleep. Since their last conversation, Abel had been teaching magic to Lala while looking for the members of the hero group. The girl was willing to follow the young man and obey him in everything. The young man wasn't particularly impressed, but he continued his journey with his new companion as they walked along the path. Abel comments that Lala hasn't awakened a unique ability yet, so he suggests starting with the basics. The young man stops and is about to show her something. Abel conjures a flame in his hand and talks about how magical power is energy that comes directly from the human body. He moves his hand and demonstrates that he can hold the flame safely. The young man adds that emotions can both increase and decrease the supply of magical power, and that especially intense emotions can make it difficult to control magic. The girl listens attentively to the young man and watches the flame in his hand. At that moment, Abel says they first need to see how the girl controls magic in a calm state. Abel passes the flame to Lala. She tries to launch a fireball to the side. The girl struggles hard, but nothing happens. Then she panics and tries to take the flame from her hands. Abel continues teaching the girl. He thinks she has no talent for magic and believes it will take time for her to be useful in combat. But he still has hope that Lala will learn something. Abel and Lala approach the city located near the sea. The young man stops and begins to look around. Lala is beside him, trying to catch her breath. It was hard for her to keep moving constantly. The young man and the girl arrive at the eastern coastal city. The port had two-story stone houses and several shops in the city. Everything was quiet and deserted. Abel and Lala walked through the streets of the city. The girl kept looking constantly around her. They found no one on the way. The city was empty. There were no signs of anyone in the houses or on the streets. The young man looks out to the sea and sees a ship docked. He tells the girl that there really was no one in the city, even though the port should theoretically be a very busy place. Lala starts to recount that even before she was born, a terrible catastrophe had occurred in the city. Because of the Demon King's army, people stopped coming to the city because they were very scared. The young man inspected the shops and saw a teddy bear under one of them. He approached, bent down, and grabbed the toy. There was blood on the toy, which seemed terrible to him. He couldn't imagine what had happened in the city. The young man squeezed the toy harder and started grinding his teeth. Times I think of Lala asterisk. She sensed the young man's tension and tried to call him to see if everything was all right. She was worried about him. Lala didn't fully understand Abel's goal, nor what he was thinking. She didn't know about his past, and she had met him not long ago. She wanted to get to know him better so they could become true partners. Without turning around, Abel tells her they need to explore the city. The girl couldn't resist and followed the young man. They walked through the streets and examined everything they found along the way. The young man walked, thinking that the city was empty. He no longer had hopes of finding anything or anyone, for example. The young man assumed the city had been left empty and deserted due to a monster attack. Suddenly, a blonde girl appeared at the corner with a huge basket of food. Abel and the girl stared at each other in disbelief. It lasted for a moment, until Abel managed to see the girl completely. Then the young man opened his eyes wide in surprise as he recognized the girl as a member of the hero group. Lala watched the girl holding the basket closely. Then the young man called out her position and name. White mage, Lala Noah. Lala couldn't speak. She could only say the young man's name, then raised her arms, dropping the basket of food and ran towards the young man, hugging him and apologizing. Lala opened her mouth in surprise and Abel looked at the girl seriously, unable to say anything. He thought about what he should do now. The blonde girl pressed her hand against her chest and apologized to Abel for leaving him. At that moment, she clearly showed that she regretted fleeing with the other heroes. Lila observed the girl for a long time, trying to understand who she was. She assumed Lala Noah had been a former member of the hero group. The girl was pretty and seemed strong. Lila noticed Lala Noah's pointed ears and assumed the girl was an elf. It was the first time Lila had seen something like this. Elves are generally very rare, so Layla thinks she was lucky. Layla also noticed the girl's straight hair. To her, that was the most beautiful girl she had ever seen. The girl had blonde, wavy hair that fell down her back. Then Layla suddenly shouted, calling out to Abel. The young man folded the seal and was about to use petrification again. Abel got alert and shouted for the elf not to dare touch him. Lala Noah fell to the ground and tried to crawl away from the young man. She was very scared of him. At that moment, Abel was determined to petrify the girl. That was why he came to the city. Layla ran towards Abel and tried to stop him. Layla holds Abel's shoulder for a moment, but when she realizes he is determined, she decides to try talking to him. Layla asks the young man to calm down. The girl tells Abel to pay attention to the fact that Lala Noah is crying and apologizing. She states that Lala Noah is in terrible shape, so Abel shouldn't touch her. Suddenly, someone shouts at the young man, telling him to stop. Many strangers have taken to the streets. Looking at the young man with disdain, Layla understands they are residents of the coastal city. They all came out intending to protect their lady. They were hostile towards Abel. Many other residents were on his side. They all stood up to defend their lady. They were ready to fight. One of the residents asked Abel to stop the violence and questioned what he had done to the lady. Lala Noah for him, why did he want to hurt her? They were willing to protect her with their lives. Layla goes into shock, and the young man looks grimly at everyone. They gathered around Lala. One of the residents begins to talk about how everyone hides deeper in the city, not far from the market, and that Lady Lala Noah protects them from the monsters that attack the city from time to time. Another resident confirms the first one's words and adds that Lala is the goddess who protects the city. She is the one who saves all the residents from the terrifying monsters of the Demon King. All the residents began to approach Abel and Layla, asking him not to touch Lala. They were serious because Abel had scared their lady. A small boy approached Abel and began to hit him with his fists. With tears in his eyes, he said he wouldn't let his sister get hurt. Even the boy took Lala's side. Lala did not stop everyone. She pressed her hand against her chest and said that Abel was her former companion. Lala did not admit that she treated the young man terribly. She said he got angry, so much because he was treated cruelly. She admitted her guilt and told the whole truth. Lala lowered her head and, addressing Abel, said she regretted her entire life for the mistakes of the past. She behaved horribly in the past. Yielding to the atmosphere of the group she was in, Lala Noah said she understood she couldn't ask anything of Abel, but still wanted to redeem herself for the sins of the past. She asked the young man for a new chance. The girl awaited his response without lifting her head. Layla remained silent for a moment, and then told Abel that Lala didn't seem like a bad person to her, even though she was seeing her for the first time. She still had a positive impression of her. She also added that the residents shared the same opinion. They adored their lady and were ready to defend her. Layla said that was already a strong enough argument to forgive Lala Noah. Abel was very irritated, but still decided to forgive her. He listened to Layla and stepped back for a moment, deciding he would think better about his decision. As for the revenge against Lalo, night fell, and all the residents gathered in the street. They approached the stalls and covered them with various fabrics, then placed plates of delicious food. It was already night. The inhabitants lit lanterns that beautifully illuminated the streets, creating a cozy atmosphere. The inhabitants also played various musical instruments. Many young people danced with girls to the sound of cheerful and rhythmic music. People gathered around the tables and watched a man skillfully cut a huge fish. Lala Noah is very happy with the party. Lala is sitting, eating delicious food and enjoying herself. Abel is nowhere to be seen. The young man felt that there was some trap, so he hid while all the inhabitants just enjoyed the festival. Lala says she needs to step away for a few minutes to bring more delicious food. Lala thanks the woman for the treats. She hasn't eaten something so tasty in a long time. Lala smiles and walks away to look for more food. Lala is walking through an alley, and at one point, she is grabbed by the arm. The girl gets scared and has no time to react, being immediately pushed against the wall and immobilized. It was Abel, pushing Lala against the wall, saying he didn't believe in her stupid act. He still feels something is off, so he can't trust that the girl has changed so drastically or regretted her cruel actions. Lala Noah looks at him and says that after 20 years, Abel hasn't changed, even after all those years. Petrified, she says he still has the same pretty little face. The girl confronts him while the young man grips her arms even tighter. Abel tells the girl that she hasn't changed either. He says that changes are not noticeable since she is an elf, asserting that she hasn't changed inside either. He feels her deceitful nature. Abel looks grimly at the girl and says he knows her true face. He is sure that she is a witch pretending to be an elf. The girl stares at him intensely. Lala Noah remembers how 20 years ago, she allowed herself to use Abel for her own purposes. She used him, but didn't mock him like the other heroes when the young man was at her service. He was constantly forced to do heavy work. Once, when he tried to catch his breath while pulling in a cart with the girl, the elf demanded he hurry up, telling him he needed to be ready. The young man was pulling a huge cart, on which the elf rested with a fan. She sat and watched the boy while he pulled the cart with all his might. That was very difficult for him. Suddenly, Stark appeared at the window of the cart and began to mock the boy, saying that Lala was a storehouse of bright ideas. The girl blinked and said she liked that. She blushed remembering how they all played with bugs when they were kids. She really liked playing cruel games with them. The girl said that when she looked at Abel, she remembered exactly those bugs. They were very similar. The girl got up from her seat, took her cane, and pointing it at the boy, demanded that he move faster. Abel. He was hit by magic and screamed in pain, but still continued pulling the cart with the heroes. The boy was exhausted. After the hit, it was even harder to drag the cart with the heroes who mocked him. They just sat inside the cart, waiting for the boy to take them to their destination. Near sunset, the heroes decided to stop and take a break. Lala and Stark were laughing at Abel. They were having fun watching the boy struggle while they did nothing. Abel decided to go to a nearby mine during the break. He soaked a handkerchief in water and said he had lived through another disgusting day. He wanted to go back. But suddenly, he heard a sound coming from a nearby cave. The boy got up. He rose completely from his knees and walked toward the cave to see what kind of sounds he was hearing. He saw Lala and Star. Lala asked if they would really go to the southern dungeons the next day, because there were many monsters and insects that the girl was afraid of. Abel was in shock watching all of this. He couldn't move, so he just kept watching. Lala leaned towards Stark and suggested they go to the casino. She assured him that if the boy agreed, she would do something nice for him. Stark blushed and accepted. He asked what they would do as soon as Abel realized what was happening. He woke up and ran toward the cave exit. Then he thought that Lala had feelings for Stark, but he realized that she treated everyone else the same way one day. The protagonist was walking through the city and noticed Lala standing in an alley with Gorgon. The girl was saying something to him and the boy was laughing and scratching the back of his head. At that moment, Abel realized how the girl started flirting with Gorgon. He realized that Lala was just seducing everyone to achieve her goals. She manipulated people and used them as she wanted. The boy remembers how stunned he was watching the girl. Then when he discovered the truth, he was deeply scared. All heroes were terrible people who used others for their own purposes, and Lala Noah was no exception. The boy understood that the girl controlled all the characters. Behind the scenes, she used all the men on the team. Lala Noah played with the heroes, and when she got tired of them, she simply stopped paying attention to them. Abel was sure that Lala Noah was just a spider in a woman's body. Abel was very angry. He yelled at the girl and asked what kind of act she had put on. He asked if she really thought he would believe her. Abel was sure that the villagers had fallen under Lala Noah's influence. According to him, the girl was simply manipulating all the inhabitants. The boy asks if the girl really had become a spiritualist, and Lala seemed worried. She asked the boy to stop and tried to say something. Lala Noah said that Abel could say whatever he wanted about her, but he shouldn't speak ill of the villagers. They were dear to her, still trying to convince the boy that she had changed. Lala, with her voice raised and crying, said she was trying to make up for her sins, explained that it was in this coastal city that at one point she was rescued. The girl remembers the day they escaped from the Demon King along with the heroes. She separated from the group and wandered alone through the wastelands. During her journey, the girl realized that the Demon King had taken over the world. Lala, on her lonely journey, had to hide in corners, scared to survive. The girl says that no one even wanted to give her food. Everyone was against her. At that moment, the girl felt negative emotions. She had never felt anything like this before. At a certain moment, the girl reached her limit, arrived at this coastal city, and collapsed. The girl lay in the mud for quite a while. It seemed like her end had come. But she didn't lose hope and extended her hands to the inhabitants, begging for water or food. All the inhabitants looked at her in amazement. She realized that no one would help her here either. She thought a new rule now prevailed in this world. Each person for themselves, and the weak didn't deserve even water or food. Suddenly, someone sat down right in front of her and placed a plate with a piece of bread. Lala was stunned, staring at the bun. Then she looked at the inhabitant of the coastal city. Lala asked why the inhabitants decided to help her. The man who handed her the bread smiled and said that at that moment, she needed the food more. He asked if that wasn't true. The girl was surprised by the kindness of the inhabitants. She didn't understand why they gave her food. Even when they also needed it, it was a very difficult time, and people lived unhappily. Just because of the loss of the heroes, the girl was left with her mouth open, wondering why people were so kind to her. And then she sighed for the first time and cried. It was then that Lala Noah finally realized what a terrible elf she had been all this time. She had done terrible things that caused suffering to others. Abel was one of those people since then. Lala Noah settled in the coastal city, trying to atone for her sins by helping people with her magic. The girl finished her story and informed Abel that she wanted him to give her another chance. She wanted to prove that she had truly changed. Especially because many years had passed, the girl joined her hands in a seal, and a tray with 2 cups appeared in her hands. She smiled and asked Abel to believe her. The girl seemed innocent, as if she had never mocked the young man in front of her. Abel silently looked at Lala Noah and the glasses she offered. He still found it hard to believe in the girl's sincerity. He looked at his reflection in the glass for a while, but then decided to give Lala Noah another chance. He raised the glass with a drink, and Lala Noah imitated him. Lifting the glass, he smiled and said that in that case, they should toast to the reunion at that moment. Layla was lying with her arms crossed on the table. Abel took a sip while Layla remained unconscious. Soon, she began to regain consciousness and open her eyes. At that moment, the girl who had been sleeping appeared in a strange and cold room. Laying on the floor the whole time, Layla couldn't see due to the darkness and started looking around, trying to remember what had happened. Her last memory was having fun at Mrs. Lala's party. Noah remembered that the woman had said she was going to get food, but after that, they didn't see each other again. She tried to understand how she ended up in a closed room on the floor. She didn't remember anything suspicious during the celebration. Everyone seemed friendly at the party. Over time, the girl's eyes began to adjust to the darkness. She noticed a cage from which huge claws were emerging. She jerked back abruptly, scared. There wasn't an animal in the cage, but a monster. The girl was frightened. She got up from the floor and looked around. There were cages everywhere from which terrifying noises were coming from. Someone asking for help, someone was growling. Apparently, there weren't only monsters in the cages. The girl looked around and saw a huge variety of creatures trapped in cages, chained up. She didn't understand how she had ended up in that room with them. The girl was shocked, trying to comprehend what was happening and what place this was. She didn't understand. Who would have locked people and monsters in cages? Everyone was growling or screaming for freedom. The girl heard a sound behind her. She turned around and saw Mrs. Lala. She just stood there in front of the girl and said nothing, looking disdainfully at the girl who was observing around as if she weren't the same friendly girl they had known in the city. Layla ran toward Lala to find out where they were. She asked if they had been kidnapped. The girl assumed that Lala had managed to get out of the cage with magic and found Layla, but she was wrong. Lala said nothing. She just stood there in silence. Lila noticed the gaze, the woman's shadow, and tried to call her again. At one point, the girl stopped trying to reach Lala. Noah took a few steps back. Lala smiled and laughed out loud, placing her hand sharply on her face. He looked at the girl with disdain, who understood nothing. Lala asked the girl if she really still hadn't understood anything, and Layla looked at her horrified. She hoped that Lala had changed, but she was still the same arrogant person as always. Lala was just pretending to deceive Abel and Lila. Lala struck her cane on the ground and a seal. A cross formed near her with Abel tied to it, causing Layla to scream. She saw that the young man was unconscious and was just hanging there with his head drooping. Lala remembered her special potion that she had given to the young man. He said that Abel had not woken up for 3 days. According to the woman's words, Abel would remain unconscious for a long time. The young man did not react in any way. Lala smiled and said that it was very easy to control a man. She only pretended to be weak so that they would believe in her. That is what she had been doing her entire adult life. She had been manipulating everyone. Layla remembered the inhabitants. They only said good things about his wife. Everyone was willing to defend Lalo, which seemed strange to him. Because the inhabitants seemed quite sincere, Layla couldn't believe all the apologies of Lala, Noah, and what happened in the central square were just lies and an act, but in reality, it had all been a grand performance made to attract Abel and Layla. Layla shouted and asked the woman what it meant. All of that reminded her that Lala hadn't said she was improving. She believed her because the woman told her story. Lala smiled disdainfully and said that in a way she really had improved. She opened her arms and said that now she would treat Abel even worse than before. The girl began to laugh even louder, saying that Abel had always been useless, and that she never felt any remorse. She never cared about the young man until he got out of the stone prison. Where Layla was in shock, she recalled the inhabitants in the square speaking so tenderly about their lady, saying that Lala Noah was loved by all. She remembered a child who cried because Lala Noah was hurt. Layla lifted her head and looking at the girl asked her if she really made all the inhabitants just pretend. She couldn't believe all this time Abel was right. Lala Noah hadn't changed. Lala Noah said that finally. Layla understood. Lala Noah recounted how she subjugated all the inhabitants with her magic. Now they all obey her blindly and follow her orders. It was very simple with magic. Lala Noah placed her hand on her face and said that she needed a lot of vitality to maintain her beauty. She cared a lot about her appearance because with it she could achieve her goals. Lala said that extracting the life force from just one person is very difficult. That's why she decided to rule the whole city, to have immediate access to a large number of people with vitality. Lala said that men are the easiest to subjugate with magic, especially when they are fascinated by a girl's beauty. They all get carried away just by appearances, and Lala is quite pretty. The woman removes her cloak and says that this coastal city has been her testing ground from the beginning. She constantly tested her magic on the inhabitants and on the monsters of the city. Over time, this city became the ideal place where she could continue her hobby. Layla looks horrified at the girl behind whom monsters appear. She turns to her servants and says it's time to have some fun. The monsters roar with joy. One of them runs straight at Layla, growling furiously, and raises its hands, and the girl runs, turning and screaming that it was all her fault. She was the one who trusted Lala Noah. Layla remembers that Abel had doubts from the beginning, Layla falls to the ground and screams in pain at that moment. A huge monster hand reaches out to her about to grab her. One of the monsters grabs Layla and laughs. The girl screams and tries to break free from the grip, but she can't as the monster squeezes her body tightly. Lala doesn't blush inside, saying she loves it when people scream. The girl was very strange and cruel. She likes seeing people suffer. She also condoned abuse. Layla turned and, gathering all her strength, threw a small flame at Lala Noah, but the flame was too weak. It didn't reach her and extinguished. Her magic was still very weak. Lala Noah begins to laugh at the girl and asks what she had tried to do. The monster begins to shake Layla in its arms. He squeezed her body even tighter, causing Layla to whimper in pain. She kept trying to free herself from the monster's iron grip. Lala Noah recounts how she saw through her magic ball that Layla managed to free herself from the stone captivity. I hadn't seen him in 20 years, so I never thought I'd achieve something like this, Lala Noah. She smiles and says she's very happy that the boy managed to free himself from captivity. She says that if the girl hadn't gotten in his way, maybe Abel wouldn't have believed in the setup. Layla looks at the woman again in horror and grits her teeth. Realizing she acted very foolishly, she should have listened to Abel from the start. After all, he knew Lala Noah. For a long time, Lala Noah sighs and says she's absolutely ecstatic. Then, Lala Noah releases all her magical energy, and smiling, she wishes her monsters bon appetit. Lala brings the girl closer and leans over her while Layla screams in terror. She takes advantage of every second of the sacrifice, blowing magical smoke directly into the girl's face. After that, the girl realizes her strength is fading. She remembers Abel and cries out for salvation. She didn't expect things to end like this, but now she's powerless, so she needs Abel's help. Layla remembers how the boy protected her during the journey, no matter what monster it was. Abel always came to her aid. He never left her at the mercy of the monsters. Layla thinks she's asking for Abel's help again. When she saw his sad face, she decided to save him. She thought she could help him somehow, if not with magic, at least with support. Then, he firmly says he doesn't want to be a burden to Abel. He wants to be the person who supports him. He wants to live up to him. She will fight to continue the journey by his side. Layla remembers the boy's advice. Magic must be controlled. She must calm down. The most important thing is to connect with the magic within her body. Layla closes her eyes and thinks about what Avenue taught her. She needs to protect herself. He didn't do that just to cook. The time has come for her to defend herself and help the boy. Layla lifts her head and looks firmly at Lala Noah. She stretches her arm to the side, and her hand begins to glow. Lila looks at Lala Noah, who is left confused by the girl's actions. Lala delivers a strong slap to Lala Noah's face. Lala Noah has no time to react or dodge, becoming furious from the hit. A huge red mark appears on her cheek. Lala Noah flies backward and falls to the ground for a moment. She can't get up and remains lying down until the monsters approach and try to help their master stand up. At that moment, one of the monsters reaches out to grab Layla, and the girl tries to escape. She manages to get far enough away not to be captured. Lala Noah was furious. The monsters kept trying to help their master get up. Meanwhile, Layla was sitting on the ground, trying to catch her breath after the attack and escape. Lala Noah speaks ill of the girl and shouts all kinds of insults, glaring at Lila with rage. She won't forgive the slap, especially now. She won't let her live. Lala Noah tries to stand up. Leaning on his staff, he asks how she dared to hit his pretty face, saying that now he will surely not let Layla live. Lala Noah uses her staff to create a seal around herself and launches a huge magic beam directly at Layla, demanding that she say goodbye to life. She was sure this was the end for the girl. Layla stares at the massive magic beam with wide eyes. Unable to move to escape, she thought it really was her end. There was nowhere to run, and Abel wouldn't come to save her suddenly. He uttered the coding word, undoing another spell. Abel is freed from the prison and runs toward Layla to save her. The boy manages to grab the girl just before the magic lightning struck her. Lala Noah watches them, wide-eyed and surprised. The boy praises Lila for buying him time. He saw how she managed to hold off the witch during that time. Abel succeeded in freeing himself and mastering a new spell. He wasn't going to abandon Layla. He just needed time to decipher the new spell and free himself. Layla also looks at the boy in awe as he says he has completed the decoding. The boy kneels in front of the girl, places his hand on her shoulder, and tells her she did an excellent job. He turns, raises his hands, and tells Layla to leave the rest to him. He's determined to win the battle against Lala Noah. Lala stands before him, holding the staff with both hands. The boy shields Lila with his back and says it's time to end all of this. He vows to defeat the witch, calling Lala Noah out by name. Layla didn't recognize the young man and stood frozen, just watching him face the monsters trying to stop him. The young man raised his hands and formed a seal. Lala shouted, asking how Abel had managed to regain consciousness if he hadn't woken up in 3 days. She had already prepared a very strong potion meant to put him into a deep sleep. The young man looked at the girl seriously and remembered in that encounter in the alley when he decided to give her a chance. He thought for a long time about what to do. He considered the possibility that she had really changed, but still remained distrustful. He drank the potion and collapsed to the ground unconscious while Lala Noah watched him with a smile, thinking her plan had worked, and that the young man had believed her. Now she could chain him up. When the young man fell unconscious again, he found himself before a massive screen filled with inscriptions. He knew Lala Noah was lying, so he devised a new plan of action. He began to approach the screen, analyzing a new spell. Abel knew his formula would be quite complicated, but he hadn't expected it would take so long to decipher it. Abel told Lala Noah that he knew she would betray him. He intentionally drank the magical poison she offered to study it with the help of decoding. Lala Noah scoffed and looked at Abel with rage. She was furious, so she decided not to wait any longer to attack. Abel turned toward. Layla called him, asking her to stand behind him. The girl obeyed and began to move since she had already done everything she could. Now, she wouldn't interrupt him anymore. All of Lala's monsters admired Abel, ready to attack. She was furious and vowed that she wouldn't let the young man leave there alive. No one had made her this furious before. She shouted an order to her monsters, telling them to capture Abel. The monsters obeyed immediately. Flying with his arms extended, the young man formed a seal and cast a spell against the monsters. They stopped in mid-air, beginning to freeze. Their bodies became covered by a stone shell. Abel used petrification repeatedly. He said he didn't care if the monsters were human. He demanded not to be interfered with. He had a goal, to defeat and take revenge on Alan. For that, he wouldn't spare anyone in his way. The monsters couldn't move since the stone shell covered their bodies. They could only growl before completely turning to stone, but there were more and more of them. Abel was watched by a creature with ears. Sitting in a cage, she stared at him with her mouth open, surprised by the young man defeating the monsters. The creature crawled to the bars of the cage to get a better look at the young man. The monsters continued attacking him, but still. He folded the seal and used the petrification spell. All the monsters turned to stone and froze forever. The monsters couldn't resist a young man wielding such a powerful spell. At that moment, Lala appeared behind Abel. She was going to attack him from behind while he wasn't looking. The girl didn't care if the victory was fair or not. She just wanted to get rid of the young man as soon as possible. She recognized the power of the decoding ability and thought the young man could easily dispel any magic and use it to his advantage. Meanwhile, Noah thought that no matter how strong Abel was, he wouldn't be able to defend himself from an attack he couldn't see. She charged her magic staff and aimed it at Abel. Ready to attack, the young man folded the seal but didn't have time to turn around to defend himself. Blood splattered, and the young man opened his eyes wide. He couldn't understand what had happened but felt pain in his back. Layla covered her mouth. Enzo looked at the young man in horror as he saw the arrow hit directly in his back. The girl wanted to help him, but she couldn't even move. Lala Noah looked at Abel and smiled ravenously. Embracing her staff, she asked what he had to say about her magic, saying she used transparent magic. The invisible arrow. Lala Noah continued, saying that the young man had been hit by a magic arrow. That couldn't be seen until it reached its target. Abel couldn't see or hear it. He fell to his knees in pain, feeling as if an arrow had pierced his back. But he had no time to react or defend himself from the attack. Lala Noah declared that he had lost and ordered her monsters to finish off the young man. One of the monsters obeyed and raised its arm to deliver the final blow to Abel. Lala Noah said that Abel lost because he relied too much on his strength. Layla shouted for Abel to do something she didn't believe. He really wouldn't have time to act and avoid the blow. Abel smiled and asked if Lala Noah was really sure he had lost. The young man moved his hand. Lifting the cloak and seals appeared around his body. Lala Noah admired the young man furiously. Layla watched him with admiration. She was surprised to see that there was a magic circle under the cloak. The young man had been protected from the start. Lala Noah's arrow did nothing to Abel. He was still alive and had suffered no damage he had prepared in advance, precisely for a situation like this, because he knew what Lala Noah was capable of. Lala Noah glared at the young man Enzo. She couldn't believe what was happening. She was sure she had defeated Abel with such a strong and unexpected attack. But still, she made a miscalculation. Abel raised his hand and said that even though Lala Noah was a terrible person, she was still a powerful sorceress among the heroes. Abel knew what the girl was capable of, and that's why he prepared. Lala Noah shot a furious glance at the young man, and thought all of this was absurd. She decided to continue the battle and try to reach him again. The girl wondered if the young man had really activated the decoding for his entire body. She watched him closely and tried to think of a new strategy to win, but then she fell to her knees realizing she couldn't defeat a young man with such a powerful ability. She wasn't prepared for such a strong opponent. Besides, Lala Noah didn't expect Abel to have become so powerful. She could only use magical attacks. Once again, she realized her helplessness. Her magical attacks would have no effect on the boy. So she finally accepted defeat. While kneeling before Abel, she leaned against his leg and began to apologize. She tried to convince him that she had just been foolish. She admitted she was wrong, but it was all just another manipulation. Lala Noah offered the boy a deal. If he spared her life, she would do whatever he wanted. She promised she would be obedient and would never manipulate anyone again. Lala Noah blushed and looked directly at the boy with penetrating eyes, saying it was true and she would do anything. The boy remained silent for a moment and then simply placed his hand on the girl's shoulder. Lala Noah didn't know what to think. She called the boy again, trying to get a response, but Abel remained silent for a long time, looking at her. Then he smiled. Abel told her she had to give up, stating that it was already over. Lala Noah didn't need to keep fighting. She had lost and could do nothing against Abel. The boy used the petrification spell, causing the girl's shoulders to be covered with a layer of stone. She felt the weight on her shoulder. The girl realized that only Abel could stop the spell. Now the boy said that no one else would believe in Lala Noah. Abel claimed that the girl had rejected her last chance. Lala immediately remembered the villagers who tried to help her selflessly. Abel said he was actually very happy that she had changed. The girl started screaming. She begged the boy not to do that, pleaded, but Abel didn't listen to her. Abel kept saying that since they started traveling together and even 20 years ago, he hated her. He said that getting closer to the girl's face, and Lala Noah screamed abruptly, asking the boy to stop. Her hands were covered by a layer of stone, and Lala Noah kept screaming. She was terrified by the fact that her beauty was being destroyed. But then she thought better and realized that if she turned to stone, her beauty would be eternal. That was exactly what she had always wished for in her life, so her dream would come true. The girl started laughing maniacally, and a second later, she froze, turning into a stone statue. It was something terrifying. As the girl was with her hand raised and laughing maniacally, the boy looked at her and then turned away, saying that she wasn't pretty at all. Abel approached Layla and said it was time to go. The boy didn't want to stay any longer in that place. Layla and Abel decided to continue their journey. At that moment, many villagers had already regained consciousness. They were standing blinking frequently, as if they were waking up from a long sleep. All the townspeople who had transformed into monsters regained their human form, came out to the square, and were bewildered, as they couldn't remember what had happened to them. During that whole time, all thanks to Abel, Abel suddenly stopped and apologized to Layla. The girl was alarmed. She didn't understand why the boy was apologizing. She tried to figure out what had led the boy to apologize. Abel said that in his plan, he hadn't taken Layla's safety into account, because the most important thing for him was revenge. He admitted that revenge would still be one of his priorities, but he asserted that the girl's safety was also very important to him. Then the boy went on to say that still, the girl was worried about him. He recalled that Layla tried to protect him. Layla's eyes widened. She didn't expect to hear something like that from that boy. Abel rarely said things like that. That's why the girl valued that kind of conversation a lot. Besides, she really wanted to help the boy. She couldn't leave him alone. Abel sighed and said he had decided something for himself. Suddenly, Layla heard a sound. The girl and the boy looked towards the bushes where the sound was coming from. They waited a moment, trying to figure out what was making noise. Someone jumped out of the bushes and shouted that they had found something. It was a strange girl with ears who jumped out, raised her hands, and addressing Abel as the Demon King, said she had seen his battle. The girl knelt and bowed to the boy, saying she wanted to be Abel's right hand. She wanted to obey him and follow all the orders he gave. The girl wanted to accompany the future Demon King. Abel looked grimly at Galil, and Layla couldn't understand how that creature could confuse Abel with the Demon King. She wondered what the girl was saying. Galil kept talking about how Abel would become the Demon King. She rested her head on the boy and rubbed against his leg. Abel tried to understand what that creature was saying. He couldn't believe that one day he would become a Demon King like Galil said. The boy just wanted revenge on his attackers. Layla thought that this beast woman named Galil appeared very unexpectedly. It seemed that Galil idolized Abel. Layla blushed at those thoughts. She didn't like thinking about that. Abel tried to push Galil away. She raised her head and listened to him attentively. The boy asked her why Galil decided he was the Demon King. He didn't understand why he needed a right hand. Layla looked at Galil in disbelief, waiting for the girl's answer since she herself didn't understand completely what Galil wanted or why she got involved in their journey. They weren't even trying to form a team with different members. Galil fell to her knees again and apologized to her master, saying it was her fault for not explaining anything. Layla thought the girl liked to prostrate herself. It wasn't the first time she did it. The day was very clear. Abel, Layla, and Galil were still outside, walking together along the path. For the most part, they remained silent because they were very tired after the battle. Galil smiled and said it was great to meet them. She mentioned that she used to be part of the Demon King's army. The girl said she was looking for a master to serve. Abel asked about the Demon King's army. Galil scratched the back of her neck and said she had been expelled a long time ago. She no longer obeyed the current Demon King. There was nothing else to do, so she wanted to travel with them. Galil shared that she dreamed of joining the Demon King's army, but she was expelled when they realized she was half human. Only demons and monsters were accepted there. After being expelled, she traveled the country until she was captured by a witch. She hadn't expected the witch to capture her, but Gallo couldn't resist the vast number of the witch's monsters. Gallo was locked in a cage for a long time. At one point, she almost lost hope. It was then that she saw Abel using the Petru spell that the Demon King used. The girl watched the young man at first, trying to understand if he really was the Demon King. She opened her eyes upon seeing the immense magical power of the young man. He was very strong. Gallo blushed and shouted with joy when she remembered seeing the young man and immediately realized he would be the next Demon King. The girl was sure that Abel would become famous, defeat the Demon King, and take his place. Lala. He approached the young man and leaned in to whisper what he thought. When Galil saw the young man defeat a member of the Gorgon heroes, he thought he was a villain. Layla clarified and said that Galil had misunderstood everything. The girl said that Abel had no intention of becoming the Demon King or recruiting people for his group. Alila started to get furious and shouted that it was absurd, calling Layla a servant, and said she had no right to speak on behalf of the master. Layla shouted, asking why he had confused her with a servant. Gallo pointed his finger at the girl and asked if she really believed that a beast woman didn't see how she took hits from the witch and couldn't deal with the monsters. He said that Layla was useless to Abel. Then Galil approached the girl and asked if there was any chance that Layla didn't want someone to interfere in the journey they were making together. Layla felt uncomfortable and asked Galil not to say such things. Galil was about to attack Layla again with new questions. Layla turned and asked Abel if he had something to say. She asked if he would really take Galil on the journey. Abel looked away and remained silent, staring intensely at the ground, because he knew that the answer would not please the girl. Layla was surprised by his reaction and Gallo smiled. Layla approached Abel and taking his cloak, started to ask him if the young man had understood her well. She wanted to know what expression he had made. Layla realized that probably Abel didn't care about taking Gallo with him at that moment. Abel said nothing because he had always liked furry animals. The young man had noticed the girl's ears and tail, which he found adorable. He felt embarrassed as he started to think about it. Galil's fluffy tail didn't allow him to say no. The young man decided that they could use an extra help. Besides, they had a long journey ahead. Galil felt something acutely. He opened his eyes wide and moved away from the young man to the opposite side, as if he had foreseen something and was avoiding it. Immediately, Abel didn't understand what had happened. Suddenly, something landed behind him with a loud crash, something huge and unnatural, raising a great cloud of dust that covered the entire view. Abel, Galil, and Layla turned, looking shocked towards the place of the fall. They all tried to understand what had happened. The dust continued to linger in the air, making it hard to see the creature. A huge iron worm with yellow eyes appeared right in front of them. The whole group was in shock. They had never seen anything like that before. The monster looked impressive. It was observing its opponents. Layla shouted that the worm seemed very large, asking what kind of creature that was. The girl was very scared and couldn't even imagine how they would be able to deal with him. Galil admired the creature, shouted that it was an iron worm. It was the one who often interrupted the witch. Galil said they needed to deal with the worm as quickly as possible. Abel looked at the girl surprised, wondering if she had noticed the worm before. It wasn't a coincidence that she moved away from the spot where the worm landed. The girl, at that moment, was standing with her mouth open in shock. Abel made the hand seal and pointed at the worm, deciding he didn't have time to think about that. Now the most important thing was to fight the worm. Many problems could arise. The young man used his spell. Suddenly, the iron worm started to attack. The spell didn't turn it to stone. The worm rose up again over the young man and everyone else. Abel stared at it, waiting for its attack. The iron worm violently shook its lower body and tried to hit Abel. While he and the others didn't move, Layla didn't have time to react, and the worm almost hit her. Then Abel picked her up in his arms and fled with her. Galil immediately got on all fours and ran after the young man with the girl. Lila turned and asked how the iron worm had been able to repel Abel's attack. She was surprised since Abel's attacks were usually very strong. His deciphering ability could help defeat any enemy. Galil said that the iron worm was protected by a shell as strong as steel. It was shielded, making it hard to cause damage. Such a shell had to be pierced with something more serious and heavy. The iron worm reached the whole group and stopped right in front of them. Abel, Galil, and Layla stopped. They needed to come up with a new escape plan, and they wanted to survive. The young man watched the iron worm closely and decided to use the petrification spell. He made the hand seal and was about to cast the spell. He was practically casting the spell but was interrupted by Galil. Abel stopped and widened his eyes. He told Galil to move forward with some boosts, jump and fly directly at the iron worm to attack it. Galil struck with her hand, and after the impact, the worm's iron armor cracked and broke into pieces. A loud crash was heard. The worm fell on its side and could no longer attack. Layla and Abel watched in surprise at everything happening. A girl was able to defeat a huge worm with a single blow, and they didn't expect Galil to be so strong. Galil smiled predatorily and let out a chuckle. She asked what the Demon King would say about that. The girl was very happy to participate in the battle after so many days trapped in the witch's cage. Galil stood right on top of the defeated iron creature and said that this was her true power. She said it would be useful in Lala and Abel's travels. She could fight both on the front lines and defend in the rear. Abel smiled grimly at Gallo, thinking that the girl's physical strength was truly powerful. He thought she was very strong and decided she would be his right hand. The young man resolved to use her physical strength and the girl's skills in battles. Abel said Gallo would go with them. Gallo shouted with joy, and Lala asked Abel what that meant. Abel continued, saying that if Lala wanted, she could also become stronger over time. Abel, Lala, and Gallo left the cave. Lala took a bag of gold and began counting the coins, thinking there was very little money left, and now that there were only 3, the travel expenses would be even higher. Lala said she would think of something. They would need money, so they would probably have to save. Or they could get coins by exterminating monsters. Gallo felt something, lifted his head, moved his ears, and looked at Abel. Lala noticed this and turned to the young man, calling him. Gallo felt they weren't alone on the road. The whole group stopped abruptly. Apparently, Abel had also noticed someone was following them. Abel asked the pursuers who they were, stating he knew they were being followed, and demanded they show themselves. Suddenly, a voice was heard from behind one of the caves, saying it suspected they had been noticed. The young man turned and saw the pursuers approaching. A girl with pink hair and armor stepped forward, followed by knights in identical armor. The girl pressed her hand against her chest and pleaded with Abel to save her country. Abel looked at the pursuers with a doubtful expression. He didn't understand where these armed men were coming from or what kind of protection they were asking for the country. But the girl seemed very determined. She wasn't going to back down. With the arrival of dusk, an armed man was sitting in one of the rooms of the fortress. He was very tense. The man's name was Aiden, and he was part of a group of heroes. 20 years later, he became a knight. The man was sweating a lot, alone in the room, and seemed to be waiting for someone, which is why he was so worried. Abel, Gallo, and Lala climbed onto the cart with the armed men. They traveled in complete silence since everyone was uncomfortable. Galil said he didn't like the carriages. Lala asked the girl to be quiet and said they needed to listen to the newcomers. The pink-haired girl in armor pressed her hand against her chest again and said she was happy to meet them. She said her name was Nage. She mentioned that she was the captain of the Knights of the Kingdom called Clam and that they were currently traveling there. It was her hometown. The girl explained that her kingdom was still actively fighting against the Demon King. She came seeking allies. But the kingdom of Alka refused to help her. On the way back, Nage and the rest of the warriors witnessed the battle of Abel, Galil, and Lila against the Iron Worm. It was Lila who convinced everyone to continue with them. Nage blushed more and said she wanted to thank Lila. Abel and Galil, from the bottom of their hearts, said that if the whole group helped them, then the war against the Demon King could finally end. Nage bowed and said there wouldn't be enough words to express her gratitude. Abel thought the girl was exaggerating. She was too excited. He wondered how she hadn't gotten hit on the head with a shield. At that moment, Galil started looking out the window, admiring the landscape. Nage approached her and tried to pull her back into the cart, telling the girl she might fall. So she asked her not to lean out so far. Abel was tapping his knee with his finger, sighing. The young man thought it would have been better to go look for the next group of heroes. He remembered how Layla was enchanted when Angel talked to her about the reward. She convinced him to take a brief pause from the main objective of the trip. The young man couldn't refuse when he looked into the girl's excited eyes. Abel thought that Layla didn't even want to hear a no. She was already mentally spending the reward they would receive. At that moment, the girl was asking if they could help Naji and her kingdom. The young man reflected on the fact that they really needed money, so he finally agreed. He also remembered the girl's words about having information on Stark and 2 other members of the hero group. The young man also found out that Gorgon didn't know everything. Abel understood that a long journey awaited them. They needed to prepare and stock up on money, equipment, and food. 5 days later, the cart with Naji, Galil, Abel, and Layla arrived at the fortress. The whole group was left speechless at the sight of the towers of Castle Claymore. Layla was impressed by the gigantic size of the kingdom, saying she had never seen such a big door. Layla agreed, saying you could feel the grandeur just by looking at it since she came from a small village. She had never seen anything like it. Naji stepped forward and said she would introduce them to her master first. She would let them know when he was ready, saying that Abel, Layla, and Gallo could wander and observe the surroundings for now. Galil began to shake her head from side to side. Layla noticed this and decided to ask what was wrong with the girl. She was acting very strangely since they entered the fortress. A man appeared and greeted Naje. The girl greeted him back, calling him master. The two began to exchange news and talk about the results of the trip. Abel was frozen in place upon seeing the master. The master also looked surprised. The man wondered how Abel had managed to escape from the stone prison. He remembered exactly how the young man had been frozen like a statue. Gallo started shaking her head from side to side. Layla noticed and decided to ask what was wrong with the girl. She was acting very strangely. Since they entered the fortress, a man appeared and greeted Nag. The girl greeted him, calling him master. The two began to exchange news and talk about the results of the journey. Abel was frozen upon seeing the master. The master also seemed surprised. The man wondered how Abel had managed to escape from the stone prison. He remembered exactly how the young man had been frozen like a statue. Abel recalled one of the members of the hero group. Naji noticed her master's and Abel's reaction, then turned to the young man and asked if they really knew each other. She was curious to know why both had such intense reactions. Suddenly, Abel stepped directly toward the master, with the intent to attack. The man screamed in fear. At that moment, Naji was right in front of him. She blocked the young man's strike with a shield. Abel didn't have time to use his magic, even though he had already formed the seal. She looked worried at the young man and asked what had happened to him. She didn't understand why he had suddenly started attacking the master. Abel cursed because the shield prevented him from landing the hit. The young man jumped to the side and thought about how Nage had managed to block his magic at that moment. Mage asked the master if he was okay. Layla covered her mouth with her hand. Enzo didn't want Ave to fight again. Galil was excited. She clenched her fists and shouted at Abel to keep attacking the man. He began to get annoyed, demanding that Naji step aside and not interfere, as Aiden was one of the members of the hero group. The young man said he was traveling alone to get revenge on his attackers. Naji extended her hand and asked what that meant. She asked why the young man wanted to take revenge on his master and then asked him to calm down. She was trying to resolve the conflict without any victims. Naji said that the master was an indispensable person for her kingdom. The girl explained that the master was the leader of all the knights of the kingdom. He had a very important role. The man tried to say something, but Nage continued saying that he was the main military power of the kingdom. Clan was the one leading all the troops and knights that protected the church. Nage adopted a combat stance and stated that as long as she was alive, she wouldn't let anyone touch the master. She was very determined since her master was an important person, not only for her but also for the country. Abel looked at the man, who averted his gaze, as if nothing had happened. Abel began to get very irritated. He couldn't accept that. Aiden acted as if he hadn't mocked him along with the rest of the heroes. Nage walked away with the master and said that it was she who invited Abel, Layla, and Galil to spend the night at the fortress. Then Nage said she had to think again about asking Abel for help. She also asked Abel not to fight with her master. Abel laughed and said he would listen to what she was saying. Layla called out to Abel, telling him that the young man was bleeding and asked if he was okay. She didn't expect Abel to get hurt. The young man remembered how he was hit on the forehead with a shield. Abel watched Nage and her master leave. He realized that the girl was very dangerous. She managed to repel his attack and protect her master. That's why the young man didn't doubt her strength. Nage was standing in the hallway of the fortress right in front of her master. She wanted to talk to him after her long journey. They needed to discuss the results and figure out what to do next. Lage was apologizing to the master because the negotiations with the other kingdom had failed. The man laughed and said they always fought with them, so that was expected. He didn't reprimand the girl. The master said he just didn't expect her to bring Abel. He asked her how it had happened that her student personally brought a friend of Aiden she hadn't seen in 20 years. So, the man was very scared. He smiled and said that if it weren't for his age, the young man would have surely hurt him. He laughed nervously and Naji realized that the man tried to pretend everything was fine. Abel, Layla, and Galil were escorted inside the castle to one of the rooms. They immediately sat down at the table, which was covered with a large amount of delicious food, and began to eat dinner. They were hungry after a long journey. The young man was very downcast, covering his face, and thought that his needs were preventing him from getting revenge on his assailants. He needed to do something, since he had been preparing for it for a long time. Besides, he had already dealt with the 2-over-1 assailants. While Galil was eating his food very quickly, Layla was telling Abel that he should calm down first. To Layla, the master seemed too weak to have been part of the hero group. She couldn't believe he was now commanding the troops of the fortress. The girl also noticed how much the man feared Abel. The young man pressed his hand against his side, lifted the edge of his shirt, showing the scar left by the hot iron. He clearly remembered how heroes treated him throughout the journey together. For him, it was no surprise that the master seemed weak in Layla's eyes, because, among all the hero group, he was the most cowardly, not violent, but easily manipulated by the stronger heroes. The young man remembered how they tied his hands and covered his mouth with a rag at that moment. Aiden was looking at him furiously. Aiden was as distressed as Abel himself since he needed to fulfill Stark's order. Stark, standing beside him, smiled and asked what he was waiting for. The young man said it was simple, trying to convince the young man to burn Abel, who was tied to the ground with a hot iron. Aiden's body trembled with fear, while Stark assured him that if he failed, he would take Abel's place. Aiden was terrified. He couldn't disobey Stark. Above all, he feared being in Abel's place. Aiden raised the iron with force, shouting at the same time, and struck Abel, who howled in pain. He couldn't resist or do anything with the wound, so he just lay on the ground enduring it. Aiden had always been just a pathetic subordinate to Stark, doing everything the stronger ones commanded within the hero group. He was the most impersonal, only afraid to defend his position. So he listened to the others. All that conversation was overheard by Nage, who was near the slightly open door. She couldn't believe what the boy was saying. To her, the teacher was none of that. At least she had never seen anything like Abel, continued his story. He said Aiden was willing to do anything to protect his life. Abel spoke negatively about him, although he acknowledged that at that moment he was just following Star's orders. He believed Aiden also deserved revenge. Suddenly, Neji burst into the room, slammed the door open, and shouted that none of that was true. Everyone turned immediately and looked at the girl. Layla shouted his name. Nobody imagined anyone was listening. On the other side of the door, Nage said that Aiden was indeed named the leader of the Knights because he was part of the hero group. He only got that position through connections, but Nage still believed in him for another reason and was about to tell a story. In his opinion, it would prove that Aiden is a good person and deserves to be the leader of the Knights. He recounts that it was the teacher who saved her. The girl remembers herself as a child living on the streets. She wore old, torn clothes and was constantly cold. Nage says she doesn't care what group her teacher belonged to. She believes he is worthy because she trusts him. She has known him for a long time and knows him very well. Layla looks at the girl in disbelief. Gallo also watches her while chewing his food. Everyone fixes their gaze on the girl. They were waiting for at least some reaction after the story. Abel was trying to understand what was going on with the girl and could even believe that Aiden saved the girl, but to Abel, the whole rescue story seemed absurd. He thinks if that's true, then someone forced Aiden to do that. Aiden always followed the will of others, making it hard for him to believe something like that. Galil reached out to Layla. The girl noticed him and turned to her. Gallo wiped crumbs from his mouth and asked if they were really talking about that armored man who found them near the door. Galil pointed at his nose and said there was a very strange smell coming from him. Layla watched the girl closely, trying to understand what that meant. She hadn't realized any of this since she wasn't that foolish. Aiden was in one of the rooms on a dark night. He leaned his hand against the wall, wondering why Abel was still alive. He also recalled how the guy had jumped to take the hit for Starkey. That's why he was frozen and marked forever. The man was very distressed, repeating to himself several times that it was already too late. He had already done something terrible, so it was too late to think about the consequences or about the kid who returned after 20 years. Someone laughed not too far away. A creature with wings and a long tail was sitting on the hill of the fortress. It laughed and showed its yellow eyes. Naja didn't find it funny after her conversation with Abel. She knocked on the door before leaving and went to her room. The girl remained convinced that her teacher was a good person. Abel. He clenched his fist and thought that Aiden couldn't be as kind as Naji had been saying for so long. He wouldn't consider the possibility that the man had really changed, but still, the boy ends up admitting the idea that Aiden could have changed. In the end, he grits his teeth from the tension. If Aiden has really changed, then they can get revenge on him. Abel was very gloomy. Layla kept looking at the boy with worry in her eyes. She wanted to ease the situation somehow and calm the boy. She didn't like that everything was just getting more tense. Suddenly, Layla starts to speak. She says she was really happy. The girl waits for the boy's reaction to those words. She believes she has at least captured his attention. He lifts his head and looks at the girl with a questioning glance. He doesn't understand what she means by that, so he waits for her to finish the sentence. He would have a lot to think about after dinner. Layla remembers that it was during the trip when Abel started talking about himself. When he talked about a group of heroes, it was when she discovered something about him. So she felt very happy. Abel's eyes widen, everyone falls silent. Then Layla just blushes and smiles. She believes she at least managed to distract the boy from thinking about the former member of the hero group, Aiden. The boy is conflicted. He tries to understand when he talked about a group of heroes and about himself. He doesn't remember any of that. Besides, he doesn't like talking about those times. The room was very silent, since no one started speaking. Abel was still in shock, and Layla watched him with a smile. This had been going on for quite a while. Gallo shook her head back and forth and yawned. She was very bored and didn't understand why everyone had suddenly stopped talking. But at that moment, what mattered most to her was the food on the table, not the conversations. Suddenly, Layla gets up from her chair and says she needs to go to the bathroom. She leaves the room very quickly. The girl decided she needed to get out for a while. Gallo flops on the bed and tells Abel they need to sleep, and the boy was still tense, but he agreed with the girl at that moment. It started to rain outside. Layla was leaning against the wall, blushing after just leaving the room, under the pretext of needing to go to the bathroom. She didn't know what other excuse she could come up with. She holds her head with her hands and blushes even more. She says that conversation was very strange. It was odd for her to remember that particular conversation about the group of heroes, but she had to bring it up to try to distract the boy. Layla was anxious because it had been a very strange moment. The girl decides she needs to stop thinking about that and go back. She assumes Abel and Galil are already waiting for her to sleep. The girl walks down the long hallway back to the room. For a moment, she can't find the room, but then she remembers the way and approaches the right corner, behind which is her room. When the girl turns the corner, she sees Aiden heading in some direction and takes a quick step back to hide. Behind the corner, she decides she must follow the man. Aiden seemed very tense, lowers his head, and says he did everything as agreed. He reports that everything is ready. The man seemed to be following someone's orders again. Layla tries to figure out who Aiden is talking to. He looks around the corner and sees no one, then observes more closely and realizes that Aiden has also disappeared, even though just a second before he was right in the middle of the long hallway. The girl turns the corner and tries to find out where the man went and who he was talking to. She can't believe a man could disappear so suddenly. Besides, she had seen him just seconds ago. At that moment, a creature resembling a bat appears behind her. It was hanging from the ceiling and laughing. The creature watched its prey and waited for the moment the girl noticed it. Layla heard the laughter and looked around, scared. At that instant, lightning exploded in the street. The creature says it's time to start the fight. The creature was exultant. Suddenly, the fortress doors are breached with the help of a huge, dragon-shaped battering ram. A roar is heard throughout the fortress. The bolts fly, and the doors collapse. Wooden parts of the doors fly out to the sides. Galil turns around upon hearing the sound. Each of the other knights also turns at the noise, not understanding what had happened. They were all inside the fortress but clearly heard something happen to the door. One of the knights, who was in the fortress tower, began to ring the bell and shout that they were being attacked by the Demon King's army. Monsters from the Demon King were invading the fortress. They shouted and growled. The monsters decided to attack by surprise at night. Since the Demon King's army only had horrible creatures, they didn't care about people or their preparation. The monsters never stood out for their honesty or justice. Naji runs to the professor and asks him to give the order. Aiden seems unsure. He says he will make a decision now and shouts for all troops to head to the main door. Abel takes off his cloak and says that Layla hasn't returned yet. He asks Galil to go look for the girl. Galil obeys and tries to track down the girl to find her, or at least any traces indicating her location. Galil asks if Abel will join the battle. Abel responds that he will not because they first need to find Layla. He won't leave the girl alone in danger. Besides, he has decided that her safety will now also be a priority. Abel says that if anyone interferes, he will deal with that person immediately and will show no mercy. Galil is glad, because in that case, they will participate in many fights and battles. Monsters attack the fortress. They flew and spat fire or tried to attack with weapons. All the guards of the fortress were trying to fight the monsters with bows and swords. But that helped little at that moment. Abel and Galil were running across the top of one of the towers while everyone else tried to defend themselves from the Demon King's army. Abel and Galil did not intend to help the knights, as they had a completely different goal. Abel realized that the Demon King's army had a clear advantage. Suddenly, Abel felt he was in danger. Monsters were heading towards him, and Galil, intending to stop the boy and the girl, a huge creature resembling a log, jumped and landed right in front of Abel and Galil. It stared at the boy and growled. The creature was enormous and made of wood. Abel immediately made a hand seal and was about to cast his spell. He aimed the magic bolt directly at the log. At that moment, Galil ducked so that the spell wouldn't hit her, but struck directly at the monster, blocking their path. The magic bolt struck. The log dead on the creature began to be covered by a stone armor. It was paralyzed and couldn't move. It wanted to attack Abel again, but the petrification was complete and the monster was frozen. At that moment, another monster began to fly towards them, resembling a huge bird. It emitted a loud and unpleasant sound and flapped its wings, kicking up dust and dirt from the ground. Galil ran to attack. It jumped, spinning, and struck it with her hand. She had released her claws, so the hit was very strong. The monster was defeated with a single blow. Abel and Galil resumed their advance, moving forward again. Abel asked where they should run now. Galil pointed ahead with her hand, then they jumped from the tower, directly where Naji was fighting the monsters. Naji was counterattacking with his sword and shield. He said there were too many monsters. The girl was sure that at this rate they would lose. There were far fewer knights, and they were weaker than the monsters at that moment. Abel and Galil landed together on the ground. They cut through crowds of monsters and eliminated everyone in their path. All the monsters just flew away to the sides or turned to stone. Abel smiled and praised Galil. He didn't expect the girl to keep up with him. Galil blushed and smiled back. She said she shouldn't be praised, adding that she was still far from the Demon King. The knights around looked at Galil and Abel in awe. The knights said they were very strong and wanted to know who they were. They were impressed by the strength and speed of Abel and Galil. Somewhere above, there was a winged creature watching everything that was happening. It seemed the rumors were true. She smiled at Abel. The protagonist and Galil were back to back. They had defeated all the monsters, and now the creatures lay unconscious at their feet. They defeated nearly all the monsters, just the two of them. And the knights thanked Abel and Galil for helping defend the fortress. The girl said that without their help they wouldn't have made it. She was examining the fortress and the defeated monsters. Abel turned around and asked her not to misunderstand him. He said they had only defeated the monsters because they were hindering the search for Layla. The young man said he had no intention of saving the fortress inhabitants. Galil suddenly felt something. His ears perked up and his eyes widened. He turned to Abel and said the monster attack wasn't over yet. he felt a new wave coming. Everyone turned towards the destroyed door. They saw a new and huge horde of monsters coming straight for the fortress. Everyone prepared for a new and long battle. Even though the knights were already exhausted, the monsters suddenly began to attack again, and the knights defended themselves. There were even more monsters than last time, all attacking violently at the knights and trying to enter the castle. Abel asked what was happening and how it was possible that the monsters had come from inside the castle. Naji repelled the attacks and said that was simply impossible. She was sure the monsters couldn't have opened all the doors by themselves. That shows that if another enemy comes through the main door, they will be pressured from both sides, making it even harder to counterattack. At that moment, the girl countered another blow from the monster. They couldn't understand where the monsters were coming from. Inside the castle, she suspected there was a traitor among them but didn't know who it was. Since there was no one suspicious among the knights, the man in the cloak opened another door. Galil felt it and pointed his hand at Aiden, saying he was the traitor. As he smelled like a demon, he just hadn't understood it immediately. Aiden turned around and saw Abel looking at him grimly. Abel started getting angry and said he already knew. Calling Aiden a traitor, the man got scared, because he understood he had been discovered and would now have to answer for his actions. Naji positioned herself right in front of Aiden and blocked Abel's path. She said there must be some mistake. She was trying to find evidence of Aiden's innocence. The girl began to justify him. Abel told her to shut up and asked if she really didn't notice anything. He asked how much longer she planned to keep protecting Aiden and that everything was already clear. Najman took her stance and said the professor had saved her, so she couldn't have done that at that moment. A winged creature appeared behind Aiden and struck him in the back with a crystal, making him scream in pain. Then the crystal on his back started to act, and she said that Aiden had failed even at such a small task. She knew she couldn't trust him because he was a coward. Aiden began to scream. As his body began to transform, he looked at his hands and saw they were changing. He was terrified at the thought of becoming a monster. There was nothing he could do to stop the transformation. Nage and the others were in shock. Seeing what was happening, the creature continued, saying that either way, Aiden deserved his reward. It laughed as it observed the changes in Aiden. The demon appeared right in front of him, holding Lala in its hands. It greeted everyone and said it was a officer of the Demon King's army, introducing itself as Jam. Abel shouted Layla's name and looked at the girl anxiously. Jamie took off and, smiling, said it was time to start the second round. The girl flew off, leaving Abel in trouble with the monster Aiden. Galil took off suddenly and was about to attack Jami. The demon was still floating in the air at that moment, so the girl decided it was a great opportunity to rescue Layla, who was still a hostage. The girl had no time to react and was struck by a huge hand from the monster. The monster's hand came from the side and delivered a blow so strong that the girl fell to the ground and groaned in pain. She lost consciousness and lay still on the ground. A huge green monster resembling a dragon appeared, roaring loudly and confronting the knights. Aiden lost control of himself and was about to face all the knights of the Nash fortress. She realized her teacher had transformed into a monster. She looked at him horrified. The girl couldn't understand how this could have happened. She believed in her teacher until the end and that he would help them in the battle against the monsters. Hani took off and told Abel to keep playing his role in a play called Revenge. She laughed and enjoyed everything that was happening. Clearly, the girl knew a lot about Abel. The knights were very scared of Aiden. Abel was trying to figure out how Jamie knew about his revenge. Then the young man stopped, deciding he didn't have time to think about that now. Abel needed to focus on Aiden and his transformation into a monster. Abel made a seal and used his petrification spell on Aiden. The monster began to block the spell and growled. He couldn't be turned to stone. Abel was shocked to see the monster could block his most powerful spell. Aiden moved his arm and hit the ground, sending stones directly at the young man. Abel tried to hide from the stones, but some hit him, and he cursed. He didn't expect Aiden in monster form to be so strong. Abel realized he couldn't block physical attacks. With the Deciphering ability, he decided he needed to think of a new strategy. The young man was thinking about what he had to do. The monster tried to attack again. Abel dodged and decided he should focus on evading, until he found an opportunity to use magic. That was the strategy he chose. Since it seemed the most effective, Abel turned and saw Galil lying motionless on the ground. She hadn't recovered from Aiden's blow. She was face down and didn't seem willing to get up to help Abel, so he turned around. He looked to the other side and saw Aiden sitting with her legs folded. The girl looked very down, not knowing what to do. Now that her master had transformed into a monster, Nage was outraged because her master had become a monster. The girl couldn't believe it, but what saddened her the most was that Aiden was allied with a monster from the Demon King's army. The monster stared intently at the girl, and Nage noticed, widening her eyes in surprise. She was trying to decide what to do. She didn't want to fight against her master, who was someone close to her. Suddenly, Abel shouted at the girl that she had to fight, trying to convince her that her master was no longer human. He tried to make her understand that she would have to fight for her life, no matter what. Abel made the seals and jumped directly at the monster to attack. The boy shouted at Nage that she was a knight and had something to protect. Aiden grabbed the boy with one hand and immobilized him, making him groan in pain. Nage recalled that Aiden once asked her if she knew what it meant to be a knight. He asked that question when the girl was still very young and knew nothing about the world and its structure. Nage jumped and hit the monster's arm directly, making it scream in pain and release Abel. Abel quickly adjusted to land without getting hurt. Abel and Nage fell to the ground. Nage asked the boy to understand her correctly. She said she wasn't doing it to help Abel. The girl said she didn't care. Abel raised his sword and said that she was a knight, so it was her duty. To risk her own life to protect others, that's what Aiden taught her, and she was going to follow his teachings. The girl was determined. She was going to try to save her master. Abel smiled and asked the girl to buy him time. The girl obeyed and raised her sword. She was going to draw the monster's attention so Abel could get through. The monster attacked Nage, but the girl blocked the blow with a shield. She looked from behind her shield and said she wasn't going to lose. Nage stated that her master must be very aware of how stubborn she was. The monster growled and began attacking her. The girl faced the monster. The monster was trying to pronounce the girl's name. It regained some control over its body and mind. The monster stopped for a few seconds. Aiden remembered a little girl he found in one of the alleys who had fled to this country to hide from the Demon King. It was in this city where he met a girl who had lost her parents at the hands of the Demon King. Aiden felt sorry for the girl and reached out to her. At that moment, he began to say, immediately, that she would become a worthy knight like him. She constantly followed him and listened to every word she said. Aiden then asked the girl to listen to him. The man said that being a gentleman meant risking his life to protect the needs of others. She thanked her master for saving her and helping her find the meaning of life. But Aiden wasn't a gentleman. He was just improvising all the time and lying. He had always been a terrible person who adapted to circumstances to survive. He didn't care about anyone. The man now looked at the girl with pride for having become so strong, even though she had grown up based on his lies. He didn't believe he could become a good master for someone at that moment. Abel thanked the girl for buying time. He was going to stab the monster and end the fight. Abel raised his hands and formed the seal. He had already devised a new plan and a spell with which he would defeat the monster that Aiden had transformed into. Abel lowered his hand and directed the magic ray straight at the monster Aiden. He was going to take care of Aiden and save Lala before it was too late. The boy kept the ray aimed at Aiden for a while. Now Najee and Abel were hiding from the intense light while a huge lightning bolt struck Aiden in his monstrous form. He growled and writhed, but he felt something preventing him from moving. Abel said it was over. The monster's body was wrapped in chains that prevented it from moving. Huge chains bound its body and absorbed all its magical energy, so the monster couldn't do anything. Aiden returned to his human form when the monster's armor completely dulled. Aiden fell to his knees and began to collapse as he had no strength left. Dawn was approaching, and Abel approached Aiden. The boy pressed his hand against the monster, saying that the master had turned into a monster because of the crystal that Jamie had embedded in him. The boy closed his eyes and used his powers. He understood that he could now use the decoding spell. As the monster had calmed down and was no longer furious, its armor fell, and Aiden collapsed on the ground. Najee ran towards the man and was glad he had become human again, but the man still felt terrible, both physically and mentally. Aiden cleared his throat and tried to speak with Abel. He apologized to the boy for everything he did during the journey with the heroes. He understood that he had treated the boy poorly because of his own cowardice. Abel looked at the man in surprise, sighed, and decided to listen to Aiden until the end, even though it was unpleasant to remember everything that had happened 20 years ago during the journey with the heroes. Aiden said he did all those terrible things because he was weak. He only knew how to humiliate himself before the strong. He didn't know how to react to those who were stronger than him. He only knew how to humiliate himself before the strong. He didn't know how to react to those who were stronger than him. He felt a lot of fear. Aiden said that even when he found his place, he betrayed all those who were dear to him to save his own life. He didn't change even when he tried to become a ray of light for a girl. Aiden said that watching Nage fight made him feel ashamed of his weakness. The girl he raised became very strong, not just physically, but also spiritually. The girl looked at her teacher Enzo, listening attentively. Waiting for more words, Aiden didn't want forgiveness. He just felt the need to say it, apologizing again. He felt a great guilt and responsibility for everything that happened in the fortress. Abel opened his mouth, surprised. It seemed strange to him that he was believing the man's words just because of his tone. He understood that this man was not like a witch or a dwarf. He felt the sincerity in the man's words, but Abel still didn't understand why he should forgive him. He couldn't forgive a man after everything that had happened to him. He could never forgive him in life. An inner voice told the boy that he couldn't forgive that man. He had suffered locked in stone for 20 years. Living only for revenge was why he had come so far. He cursed and didn't understand why he should forgive that man. A magic bolt struck Aiden directly in the chest. Everyone was in shock. Abel and Nage couldn't understand what had happened, but they suspected who could have hurt the knight to keep him from saying anything unnecessary. Abel saw Jamie sitting in one of the towers. The girl yawned and said she was bored. She wanted to see the battle and the suffering of people, not tears or apologies. Those things seemed strange to her. At that moment, the boy flew immediately and pulled Layla from the girl's hands. He held the girl's body in his arms, happy that Layla was okay. Jamie looked at Abel. She asked him if he didn't feel like yawning with everything that was happening. She asked since when he had become so kind. She had been watching him for a long time and had never noticed any of that before. Jamie told the boy to look at himself. She assured him that he didn't need to be nice. She said the black flame of his hatred should burn everything until the end, so he shouldn't prioritize the safety of ordinary people. Amy laughed and said that the one he hated most in the world would be waiting for him. In the Demon King's castle, she was sure Abel would receive an unpleasant surprise in the form of an old friend. From the hero team, Jamie took flight and left. There was nothing left for her in the fortress, since the knights, along with Abel, had repelled the monster attack, and Aiden had become human again, leaving the world of the living. Abel tried to stop her, but it was useless. He decided to stop trying to hold Jamie back because at that moment he needed to focus on Aiden, who was living his last seconds of life. The boy she needed was trying to call the professor over and over again. She, in tears, begged him not to leave the girl. The man was in terrible shape, and the girl understood where all of that was heading. But she didn't want the professor to leave her alone. The man trembled and extended his hand towards her and said that it wasn't him who became a worthy teacher. Aiden was sure that it was the girl who taught him to have courage in his last moment. The man died and the girl began to cry. She didn't want to accept that the teacher had left her. After all, she still didn't blame him. For the lie or the supposed betrayal, he was her savior, the only person who reached out to her. Abel watched it all with a gloomy look. He no longer thought of revenge against Aiden. Abel thought Aiden was just a means of revenge for him. Now he no longer cared about the man's fate. Aiden had regretted it and left the world of the living, so there was nothing else Abel could do. But for Najee, Aiden was a mentor to her. This was a very deep loss, comparable to losing a loved one. It was very difficult for her. The boy saw it and didn't feel any better than she did. Outside, the day was sunny. The fortress still stood after the monster attack. Although damaged in some spots inside the fortress, everything was very quiet when everyone gathered outside. One of the knights laid out a bag on a red cushion as a gift, thanking Abel and Gallo for their help. He knew that wasn't enough. But they had nothing else to offer, so they could only give a bag of coins. Abel, Gallo, and Layla were on a stone bridge. Right in front of them were the knights trying to thank the group for their help. Abel wanted to finish that as soon as possible. Since he didn't need rewards, he was about to leave again to find the next member of the hero team. Suddenly, someone shouted, asking Abel to stop. It was Najee, who had run all over the fortress to buy time and talk to the boy and thank Gallo and Lila for their help. Najee rushed out of the fortress, passing hurriedly between all the knights and stopped right in front of Abel, Galil, and Layla. The girl, blushing and looking at the boy with determination, said she wanted to go with Abel. Abel and Layla were in shock. The boy looked at her with a doubtful expression. He didn't understand why, after everything that happened, the girl decided to ask to join his group. The boy assumed she would be mad at him. Najee looked him in the eyes and said that battle against the monsters and Aiden made her understand something very important. She now realized that to protect everyone, she needed to defeat the Demon King as soon as possible. Abel immediately went on the defensive and refused, saying he was only interested in getting revenge on those who had wronged him, and that the girl could try to find someone else. He was sure that he definitely wasn't suited for that role. The girl frowned and remained silent for a long time, thinking about what she could say to convince the boy. Najee was sure they needed to cooperate to face the Demon King. She said that in this world, Abel was the only one who could do something against the Demon King. His decoding ability could dispel any spell or enchantment. He had already faced the Demon King Najee. He pressed his hand against his chest and said he would try to convince the boy to defeat the Demon King. Since he was the only one who could do it, she believed it was her duty as a knight. Abel walked away upon hearing the girl's plans. He frowned because he didn't understand why he had to do such a thing. He had his own goals to pursue. The Demon King was not one of them. Then Layla approached the boy, leaned down, and whispered for him to accept Najee in the group. Layla said that Najee could protect him in battles and perfectly cover his weaknesses. One of Abel's weaknesses was physical strength, something Najee possessed in sufficient measure. The young man stepped away from Layla, closed his eyes, and sighed. Abel understood that Layla was right and that Najee could indeed be useful. The young man recalled the previous battles and realized that physical strength would be useful. Abel said that Najee could join. Najee shouted happily about working alongside Abel. Galil and Lila. Galil and Lila celebrated the arrival of a new member to the team. Thus Najee joined the group and now had Abel with the decoding ability, the novice mage, Layla and the half-beast Gallo. The whole team resumed their journey and followed Abel. The group visited many cities and villages. They went to the markets to stock up on food and gear. Galil always watched the food while Layla chatted with Najee, and Yabel kept an eye on the surroundings. The team encountered several monsters and demons on their way to the next member of the hero group with whom they fought. When Layla and Abel used seals and magic, Galil and Najee demonstrated their physical strength at dusk. The group decided to make a stop. The moon shone in the sky, everything was very quiet and serene. The group stopped near a mountain. Najee lit a campfire and set the food to cook. The others sat and watched it. Najee took off her armor to rest a bit, then went back to cooking, pulled the ladle out of the fire, and showed it to everyone. The girl asked everyone to look at the dish she had prepared for dinner. She was very happy to show off her skills. She invited everyone to join the meal and start eating. Najee was sure everyone would enjoy her food. Galil immediately buried his face in the plate and began to eat very quickly without even chewing. Angel looked at her and laughed at her quick reaction at that moment. Abel was sitting not far from them on a rock. Layla also took a plate to try the dish that Najee had prepared. She turned to Abel and noticed how distant he was. She worried again about him since Abel had been very quiet lately. Layla approached Abel and called his attention. She wanted to ask him something. The young man decided to find out who would be next. Upon seeing the list of heroes that Abel wanted to take revenge on for his 20 years of imprisonment, Abel grew somber, averted his gaze, and fell silent for a moment, thinking about how he would take revenge or perhaps about the memories of the cruel treatment he suffered. After a few seconds, the young man starts talking about the group's next hero named Master, whom they will take revenge on. The girl sits closer and listens to Abel attentively. Abel says that Master studied at a magic school and became a monk. He was considered elite. The young man was very intelligent and determined. Abel says that many in the school looked up to Master, as he mastered a great number of spells. He was a very capable student even without physical strength, but he stood out for his brilliant mind. Then Abel falls silent again for a moment and after a few seconds adds that Master was someone completely different from the rest of the group of heroes. Even Abel himself admits it. Layla asks him to explain. Abel looks down and says that Master never mocked him, never forced him to do anything, didn't experiment on Abel, and much less touched him under the pretext of training. Abel remembers one of the days they were traveling with a group of heroes. He was people tied to the trunk of a tree, behind which areas had been drawn on the bark that had to be hit with a knife. At one moment, the knife passed just a few centimeters from Abel's face, who screamed in fear. During all that time, Lala, Noah, and Stark were throwing knives. It was Lala Noah who almost hit Abel. Stark shouted that the girl had hit the 50-point area and then praised her. Lala Noah smiled and thanked the young man she had called. She started to stroke the blade of the next knife and asked Master if he wanted to join too. He assured her it was fun. Master was leaning against the trunk of the tree the whole time, just sitting there reading a book. The young man wasn't interested in the excitement of the other heroes. He preferred to spend time alone. Master moved away from the tree, put down the book, and smiling, said that he refused. He wanted to read the book that seemed more interesting to him than throwing knives. Stark grimaced and said that the young man was very boring. He didn't understand how anyone could prefer books over throwing knives. Aiden was by his side and remained silent because he didn't want to draw attention. Gordon was also with them, who gave a thumbs up. Abel watched in horror at everything that was happening, sweating a lot due to the effort. He tensed even more upon hearing Stark say that Aiden would be next to throw the knives. Aiden couldn't refuse, and Gordon burst out laughing at his reaction. Abel looked directly at Master at that moment, gave his fixed stare back. He wasn't smiling, showing no disdain or pity, just observing. During battles, the young man intertwined his fingers and cast magic against the monsters, always with a book in hand. She didn't have much trouble in battles against monsters when facing her opponents. She only watched the other heroes, looking at Stark fight his enemies, and seemed to notice something, but no one knew exactly what. The young man always looked either at the book or at what was happening around him. He never seemed impressed. On the contrary, he seemed distant, as if he didn't care about what was going on. Abel noted again that Master always just observed and always had that expression on his face, as if he were surrounded only by insects. He didn't consider others as equals. Abel said that Master thought this way not just about him, but about the entire group of heroes. He preferred to keep his distance, which is why he had no hurry to participate in the games or tease Abel. Abel said he had very little information about Master. He seemed like a mysterious young man, hard to understand as he was always distant and silent with Abel. They only exchanged glances, and nothing more. Lila remained silent and looked at the boy with compassion. She couldn't believe that Abel had gone through so many terrible things. She also didn't understand why Master didn't do anything and simply stayed out of it. Maybe he could have helped the boy. Suddenly, Nage got up from her seat and shouted, flushed with a worried expression. Abel was startled by the girl's sudden jump. He looked at her with a questioning expression as Nage quickly placed a plate of food she had prepared into Abel's hands. The girl told the boy to eat his portion. Abel replied that he refused. Nage shouted and asked why the boy didn't want to eat her food. Abel became serious, frowned, and said he didn't want to eat what Nage had prepared, since she didn't know how to cook. The girl immediately shouted indignantly, asking how the boy dared to speak like that about her food. Nage asked what he knew about cooking. She was sure she cooked perfectly because everyone had told her so. The boy replied that the problem was that the people from his kingdom had no sense of taste. Layla immediately got up from her chair and tried to calm Nage and Abel. Nage asked the boy to look at Galil. She said that the girl ate several portions and very quickly. Galil scratched the back of his head and, smiling, said that anything was better than the dishes he used to eat before. He said that the dish Nage cooked tasted very much like those dishes. Then a fight broke out. The girl screamed that Galil was lying. Nage wouldn't admit that her food had no flavor. Abel shouted that the girl simply had no palate. Galil said that most of the time, he was right. Layla simply watched in silence the battle between her friends for a while, then still decided to approach them and try to calm them down. He said they just needed to talk when suddenly someone threw a plate of food and it hit Layla right in the face. She was soaked and vegetables from the plate were on her head. Everyone immediately stopped. Noticing Layla with a plate on her head, she began to get angry, became gloomy and silent, thinking about how to get revenge on Galil and Abel. Now that a plate of food had been thrown on her, ruining her clothes and hairstyle, the girl took the plate off her head and shouted for everyone to calm down. She was so irritated that she looked like a furious dragon spitting fire from her mouth. Everyone immediately stopped. Abel looked at the girl in horror, nervously started to smile, and Galil was so scared that she couldn't close her mouth. Abel and Najee were not in a hurry to put away their weapons. Layla had never been so furious. She ordered everyone to sit down and calm down, and they all fell to their knees immediately and bowed their heads. Layla continued expressing her dissatisfaction, saying they should stop because they were making noise in the forest and could attract monsters. Layla said Najee needed to work in the kitchen to improve her cooking skills. Najee shouted in surprise. Then Layla turned to Galil and told her to control her anger. Lily gave a military salute and said she would follow Layla's instructions. Layla pointed firmly at Abel and said eating was very important, so he had to eat what Najee had prepared. The boy looked confused. He didn't expect such violent reactions from Layla. He looked at the girl and thought about what he should do now. He was afraid to refuse as he had never seen Layla so furious. Still, he decided that for his own safety, it was better to eat the food made by Najee. At that moment, Najee and Galil, who were in shock, stood aside, watching how Layla had managed to convince Abel to eat the food. Despite everything, the boy seemed gloomy but emptied the plate and thanked for the food. Layla's mood changed immediately. She returned to being a cheerful and friendly girl, crossed her arms at her waist, tilted her head and smiled at the boy, at the same time praising him for eating everything. Najee was gradually recovering, but was still staring wide-eyed at Layla and Abel, who had been forced to eat all the food. Galil sat with her and smiled widely, turned to Abel and asked why he obeyed what Layla said. Layla and Abel turned, looking at the girl in disbelief. They fell silent for a while. Najee asked if Abel obeyed Layla in everything because they had known each other for a long time. The girl sighed, as she believed that was the most likely option of all. Layla laughed and said that Abel had simply become more flexible over time, assured the girl that she needed to talk more with him so he would at least start saying something about himself or listening. Abel's eyes widened in surprise. Only then did he realize he had truly become more flexible compared to how he was before. Before he started traveling with his friends, the boy looked at his companions. He saw Najee smiling sweetly and noticed Galil starting to approach Layla. Since the girl no longer scared him, Layla raised her hands and asked what she was talking about. To Abel, it seemed that everything had become more fun. The boy recalled his former companions, but they were the ones he had to defeat the Demon King with. He thought he wasn't sure if that was a bad thing or, on the contrary, a good one. Abel didn't even notice how he started to smile, lost in thoughts about how comfortable he felt with his new companions. He scratched the back of his neck and tried not to show his smile, even though he was comforted by his thoughts. The boy continued watching as Galil said something to the now frightened Layla while Najee simply smiled and laughed. Thus, another night passed on their joint journey. Morning arrived and the team prepared to leave. Abel led his companions through the forest. It was very dark. There were crows perched on the branches everywhere, watching the travelers. One of the crows cawed, and as a result, all the birds flew away. Galil got scared because the crow cawed very loudly. He approached Abel and said that it seemed like the situation in the forest wasn't very calm. Then Layla suddenly stopped and noticed something. She asked the others to stop. The girl looked anxiously ahead. She was about to ask the young man if they were going in the right direction. Abel and the others stopped. Abel looked grimly at the village they had arrived at. Layla still asked if that was really the place where Mazda lived. It was hard for her to believe because the group had arrived at the village of tents that seemed abandoned. There were small, dilapidated houses everywhere. The fences of many houses were broken, and there were trees all around with long branches. Abel said they needed to move on. They passed by the houses of the village. Galil and Najee looked at everything with interest. The inhabitants came out in white clothes and also observed the newcomers. Many seemed distrustful, whispering and closing their doors. They didn't seem friendly. On the contrary, they were distant. Everyone did not hesitate to watch Abel and his group. Gallo was a bit annoyed by that reaction, crossing his arms at his waist. He asked why they were staring at them so intensely, as if they were bandits or monsters. Layla also noticed this. She looked distrustfully at all the villagers. Abel raised his hand. His inner voice told him not to get distracted by something like that. He kept in mind the idea that Mazda had to be in that village. Another member of the hero group who had to know about revenge, the young man clenched his fist and pressed it against his chest. He looked resolutely forward and repeated to himself that he needed to take revenge on his attacker. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to move on or take revenge on the most important offender. While Abel and his companions advanced, they were being watched from a corner. The secret person who was hiding behind the travelers turned their gaze toward Abel and used magic. The young man stopped abruptly and opened his eyes, feeling something strange. His vision darkened suddenly. He began to lose consciousness and fell forward. Thus the young man fell unconscious to the ground. Naji looked at Abel in surprise, not understanding what had just happened. Galo opened her mouth in shock and immediately frowned since she also didn't understand anything. Layla looked at the young man anxiously. All the girls were in shock, but after a second they gathered themselves and began to approach Abel to find out what had happened. Layla knelt in front of the young man. Naji was ready to draw her sword and Gallo looked around. The young man was lying on the ground unconscious. Everyone tried to shout at him and somehow bring him back to consciousness, but he did not respond and remained lying without reacting to any sound at all. Najee, Gallo, and Layla were standing right in front of the young man trying to understand what had happened. Najee still had her mouth open in surprise and began to draw her sword from its sheath. While Layla tried to call the young man several times, Galil started waving her arms up and down, asking if the young man was really dead. They also began to panic. Gallo decided to examine him again and then started shouting that he wasn't coming to his senses. She asked what they should do now. Layla became more serious and told the girls to calm down. Since they first needed to take the young man to a safe place and not panic, the girl decided they needed to hide in a safe place. Since it was unknown who had attacked them, Galil immediately calmed down and obeyed. Najee said she understood everything and approached Abel. She picked him up and carried him on her back. The girl would take Abel to a safe place just as Layla said. She watched the young man who still had not woken up. They all felt his breathing, which reassured them, since it was evident that he was still alive, just unconscious. But the girl decided not to think about that for the moment and focus on finding a safe place for Abel. Nage took the young man to the nearest location that offered safety, which turned out to be the closest tavern. Nage saw the sign and immediately took the young man there while Galil and Layla thought about what to do next. Nage carefully placed the young man on the bed. Lila pulled the blankets. The young man remained unconscious, and that worried Lila a lot. She understood that he couldn't have just fainted for no reason. She wondered who could have attacked them. There was a boy standing at the door of the room where everyone was. He smiled while the girls thanked the hosts for taking them in. They were quickly provided with a room and everything they needed. The boy said it was no problem for them. He seemed very kind. They sat in a chair and began to talk about what could have happened to Abel. They said the young man didn't seem like he would regain consciousness. No one could understand the reason, and that worried the girl a lot. Layla lowered her head as once again they couldn't help the young man in any way. Galo was sitting right next to Abel and watched him with sadness. She was very affected. She gently touched his face with her finger, trying to bring him back to his senses, but it was no use. Then, she was very affected, lightly touching his face with her finger, trying to bring him back to his senses, but it was no use. The girl started slapping the young man's face, but he still didn't wake up. She got angry and began to bite Abel's hand to wake him up, but there was no reaction. Layla approached the girl and started hitting her on the head, demanding that she stop. She turned and asked if it could have been a magical attack, considering that no one had noticed or felt anything. Abel couldn't just lose consciousness like that. Layla said that Abel always protected himself with magic. She remembered the moment in the battle against the witch when she shot an arrow at him, but the young man had already placed seals on his body beforehand. Layla looked ahead and said he wouldn't have fainted from a magical attack. She thought it was something else. Najee asked if it could have been a physical attack, but quickly said that was unlikely. After all, the boy had no wounds or scratches on his body. She didn't understand what could have caused this. Layla looked at the boy with concern. He was still unconscious, his face relaxed as if he were just sleeping, but the girl knew something was wrong. She turned around and clenched her fist, pained to see the boy in such a serious state. She felt she had to help him. She had to think of something. The girl remembered a night when Abel pretended to fight because he didn't want to eat. The girl then turned around and saw his smile. She hadn't expected to see something like that at that moment. Layla thought that she had finally managed to get him to smile and open up a little. It was then that she had the hope of being able to lift the weight of vengeance from his heart. After all, he was happy, even if just for a moment. The three of them were still in front of the bed where Abel was lying. The boy hadn't regained consciousness, and the girls didn't know what to do. Having exhausted all assumptions about what had happened to him, they found themselves at a dead end that was hard to escape. Layla clenched her fist and turned sharply to one side, looking determinedly at her companions. She first turned to Gallo, then to Najee, and said they were obligated to help the boy. Najee looked at the girl with a smile. She liked her determination and was ready to listen and support her. After all, besides the three of them, Abel had no other friends or acquaintances who could help. Najee and Gallo looked at Layla, thinking about what they could do to help Abel. Gallo raised her hand and said she had a great sense of smell, so she could find the culprit who had made the boy fall asleep. Najee pointed at Galil and asked how her sense of smell would help, wanting to know whom exactly she was going to sniff out. Since they didn't know anyone, and especially considering that the culprit was unknown, it would be useless. Gallo got discouraged and dropped her ears. Because she hadn't thought of that, suddenly, Layla had an idea. She says the culprit is probably Masta, she assumes, for a series of reasons and circumstances. Besides, Abel has no sworn enemies. Layla says this is the first time they've come to this settlement. No one knows them. Layla assumes that Masta realized Abel was a serious problem and a threat to him, so he decided to attack first and discreetly. The girl thinks that's the most realistic option. Neji looks at Layla in surprise. He had no idea a girl could be like this. He realizes that Layla suddenly started thinking very calmly and rationally. Normally, Layla was emotional and vulnerable. Suddenly, Galil turns to Layla with a question that no one expected. He noticed strange behavior in her attitude towards Abel, then thought the girl had warm feelings for the guy. Galil asks if it's true that the girl is in love with Abel. Is that why she tries so hard to save him? Layla blushes and looks at Galil in surprise. She falls silent for a moment, but after a few seconds, the girl bursts out and asks how Galil could say something like that. She points out that they are team members, and that's why she behaves like this. She explains all of that with simple enthusiasm and worry for the guy. Galil interrupts the girl and says he just wanted to point out that Layla isn't the only one who loves the guy. Layla is left in shock after those words. She just stares at Galil, surprised, and doesn't rush to respond. Galil blushes, presses his hand against his chest, and says that Abel saved her, which is why she loves him too. The girl is sure that Najee will support her. Abel really played a very important role, and in every girl's life in the team. Najee says she wouldn't say it out loud, but she really likes Abel. She understands that he's not just a crazy guy, obsessed with revenge. Besides, he helped her many times during the defense of the fortress, against the attack of the Demon King's army. Najee says they still need to help Abel because even though he won't admit it, he really helped the girls. Layla blushes and smiles. She's very happy that the others support her in this matter. All the girls decide that together they will save Abel. Now it's their turn to take care of the guy. Layla and Galil put on their cloaks and go out to find the culprit, while Najee stays at the tavern to watch over Abel until they return. The boy remained unconscious, not even imagining how hard his teammates were working to save him. They are ready to find the culprit of the boy's serious condition and force him to bring Abel back to consciousness. At that moment, in some other space, the boy's body was wrapped in chains that shone, due to magic. The boy was in complete darkness. There was nothing around him, except the chains that wrapped around his body, arms, and legs. Abel regains consciousness, but not in the real world. He opens his eyes and tries to understand what happened. He had a strong headache and felt his mind clouded. Abel couldn't see anything and couldn't hear anything. So it was hard for the boy to navigate the space. He waved his hand trying to activate the decoding ability, but nothing happened, and that ability was the key to his arsenal. He understood he wouldn't be able to get out alone, but he didn't know what to do in that case. He couldn't wait for help. He had no idea how much time had passed. It felt like he was back on the stone. He couldn't move or understand what was happening. Time seemed to have stopped for him, or perhaps it no longer existed. The boy shuddered at the thought of being back on the stone. He didn't want to relive that negative experience. The mere memory terrified him. He didn't want to be trapped in a rock for the rest of his life. Abel remembers how terrible he felt when his heroes left him alone in that field. The young man felt just awful. The flow of thoughts couldn't stop the awareness that he was trapped in that moment. Layla and Galil were walking through the streets of the city. They were looking for Masta because above all the suspicions fell on him. He was the penultimate hero. Abel planned to take revenge on the girls, discovered his possible location, and went to the two-story White House that many residents talked about. The two-story White House didn't seem any better than the other houses in the settlement. A young man with glasses and a cloak found the girls near the gate of the house. The young man smiled. He seemed friendly. The young man asked if they really came to that house because they had heard about Masta's reputation. He said that Masta helped the settlement a lot, and that's why they started to worship him, while the young man praised the master and said he was a unique person. He tried to convince the girls of Masta's exclusivity. He didn't seem to notice that it was hard for them to hear so much about Masta. Layla didn't interrupt him and just watched in silence. The girl tensed up when the young man said that Masta would definitely help them. He started convincing them again that Masta could solve any problem. Layla looked at the house and thought that the young man had become a master and organized his own sect. People in white cloaks were walking everywhere. All the settlers praised Masta. and constantly talked about what a great man he was. The young man turned to the gate and said that if the girls wanted, he would take them to the mentor. He said a huge number of people had already passed through that gate because they needed Masta's help. He smiled and pointed to the gate. The young man saw that the girls were in internal conflict, but he didn't rush them. The girls weren't in a hurry to enter since they still had suspicions about the Cetl. Sect of Master Galil turned to Lala and asked what they would do. Lala said they had no choice. Besides, if they wanted to help Abel regain consciousness, then they would have to go in and see. Galil peeked through the gate and saw some young people in white cloaks. Whispering something to each other, they were very excited, which caught the girl's attention, and felt curious to know what they were talking about. The girl watches closely and listens even more, seeing the young people smiling like crazy and laughing. It's funny for the young people because the girls think they'll be taken by the master, but one of them says that only the highest elite is allowed to join the master's team. He chooses who will join his sect, and he only picks strong and capable people, not just random passers-by. The second young man says there's nothing to worry about, because in that case, they'll simply be turned into slaves for the Demon King's army. After those words, Khalil is stunned. Galil suddenly turns to Layla, screams her name, and pushes her away from the gate of that house. Layla asks what happened. She doesn't understand why the girl reacts so abruptly. Galil and Layla run away from the house. Covering their faces, the young man at the gate tries to call them, reaching out in front. But he realizes the girls have already run too far. Galil remembers the words again, about the Demon King's slaves. She is horrified at the thought of people chained, walking in formation. While a huge guardian monster watches them from above, Galil understands that this settlement is an even more dangerous place than they imagined. She fears they might inadvertently become slaves of the Demon King, and then they wouldn't be able to save Abel. Galil and Lila didn't even think that the master was somehow connected to the Demon King. They hoped he just had people praising him, but the young man turned out to be as terrible as the other characters Abel talked about. At that moment, the master and his guests from the Demon King's army were having lunch on the upper floor of a two-story house. They were sitting in a large hall at a table that was covered with various delicious dishes. The young man remembered Abel, who was considered useless in his team. Nobody understood how he could have been chosen. The master thanks the girl for the information and says it was thanks to the data provided by the Demon King's army that he managed to find the young man immediately and neutralize him. He was thinking about Ava. The girl sitting at the opposite end of the table was Jamie. She was biting into a piece of chicken thigh, eating very quickly and in large amounts, practically not listening to the young man because she found him boring. Hemi was sitting with her legs crossed on the table, looking to the side because she was bored. She says she managed to provide the information, but in a very boring way. The girl doesn't like being bored. The master looked at Jamie with a smile and asked if the Demon King's army was convinced of her loyalty. He has been enslaving people for them for a long time, thus weakening the local threat coming from the village. The master believes he has done a lot for the Demon King and thinks he deserves something more. The young man waits, being able to negotiate a reward or promotion, adjusts her glasses and asks if it's time to be by the Demon King's side. The demon believes she has done many things, so she deserves to be among the Demon King's closest. Jamie yawns and takes a moment to respond, saying that maybe the Demon King will hear her request, but she herself doesn't know anything or make any decisions. The girl is generally bored being next to Masta, which is evident in her entire posture. Masta starts to get irritated by the girl's reactions. A vein in his forehead begins to throb. The young man is very annoyed, because he had really spent a lot of time and effort for the Demon King to pay attention to him. Masta abruptly gets up from his seat, catching the girl's attention, and says he can say it another way. Since Jamie doesn't give him a clear answer, the girl looks at the young man intently. She's waiting for his attack. He seems very irritated. A dark aura appears around him. The young man raises his hand and asks if it's not time for the girl to give up the space he's going to occupy. The young man doesn't think it's too daring on his part. Hammy stares at the young man and continues eating. She smiles like a predator. The girl didn't expect the young man to have the courage to challenge her at that moment. She becomes interested and decides to accept the challenge. Hammy spreads her wings and rises directly above the table. The table and the plates of food are overturned, causing a loud crash. Masta is still standing, watching the girl creating a whirlwind with her wings. The rest of the people in the house heard the strange noises and immediately ran to the room to see if everything was okay with Masta. They were worried about the master. Then he had a meeting with the general of the Demon King's army. When Jamie calms down and lands on the ground, the tension between them also decreases. One of the young men who ran to the room apologizes for interrupting and says they have an urgent matter. The young man is interrupted by Jamie. She turns to Masta and says she won't be able to give him what he wants. She says, not in this life. The girl already has her own plans for both Abel and Masta. The young man lowers his head and looks at the ground. Dissatisfied with the outcome of the conversation, he hoped to continue being a confidant of the Demon King. Then he would have incredible power and strength. Masta takes a few steps towards the exit and leaves, slamming the door behind him. He decides to leave that conversation for later. Maybe he can think of something else. But first, he needs to deal with Abel and his companions. Hammy is completely crouched on the ground. She reflects on this and remembers an important detail. Then the girl starts to hum a cheerful song. Smiling widely, her mood improves as she remembers Abel chained. Hammy decides she has nothing else to do at Masta's house, so she spreads her wings again and takes off flying. She thinks something very fun is going to happen soon. It was still daytime outside in the village. The streets were quiet except for the cawing of the crows. All the houses looked faded and in ruins. This was the tavern where Abel and the girls were staying. A boy was sweeping near the tavern entrance. He noticed the girls approaching and immediately greeted them, congratulating them on their return. He set the broom aside and went with Lala and Galil to escort them to the room as the boy climbed the stairs. He decided to ask if they had really fought against the Demon King's army and the realm or the Alliance. Lala was speechless for a few minutes but said they had fought against the Demon King. The boy got excited and said he admired their team. He continued up the stairs and asked them several questions about Abel's group's travels. When the boy opened the door to the room, he froze and gaped at what was happening. Galil was also surprised and widened his eyes. And Layla was still laughing at that moment and didn't realize what was going on. There were many people dressed in white in the room. They surrounded Najee, who was trying to push them away. A man tried to take the shield from the woman, which outraged her. She was pushing because she couldn't draw her sword from its sheath the whole time. The woman was watching Abel. She was waiting for Galil and Layla. She wasn't going to put the young man in danger, so she immediately went to defend him. Layla and Galil got up right away. They were going to fight against the people dressed in white and protect Abel. Along with Najee, they understood they would have to fight against Master Musta's servants. One of the men pulled a dagger from his sheath and said they were doing all of this in the name of Lord Musta. They were going to protect their leader, so they would fight against Galil. Najee and Layla, regardless of what happened or who tried to interfere, the boy was still standing at the door. But when he saw the knife and realized a fight was starting, he shouted, asking what was happening. The boy was confused. He didn't understand why everyone suddenly started fighting, because just a few seconds before, everything was calm and they were happily going up the stairs. The people dressed in white tried to hit the girls, but they dodged or blocked the attacks. Galil jumped from one opponent to another, attacking with his hands like claws. Each one blocked the blows with her shield. She fought fiercely. Although there were many of Master Masta's servants, she didn't have time to draw her sword to start attacking. Layla also wasn't prepared for the fight. Someone attacked her. The girl jumped back and screamed. As she almost got hit, she didn't have time to orient herself and also start attacking. Najee was still blocking the attacks from several opponents. At the same time, he heard Layla scream. Then he turned to her and told her to take Abel and the boy. He thought the girl should take them. Layla immediately grabbed the boy. She was alarmed by the battle in the tavern. Layla watched the fight and didn't want to leave her companions because she wanted to be useful. So, a thought occurred to the girl. She was trying to understand how the people from the Masta house managed to enter the tavern so easily. That could only mean that the boy had let them in. Then the girl thought about how the boy found out about their battle in another realm. She realized that clearly something was wrong. The boy couldn't have discovered that from passers-by or other inhabitants. The girl became suspicious and suddenly got serious. The boy asked her to listen. Layla froze as the boy's expression changed rapidly from scared to cheerful. The boy said she had a very strange look. In the next moment, he took off his disguise and revealed his true appearance. All this time he was Masta, merely pretending to be a young man from the village. No one suspected anything. Masta smiled and said that sooner or later they would have discovered everything anyway. He wasn't going to hide for long, since he needed to act. The boy smiled. Layla was watching Masta's reincarnation with wide eyes. At all this time, she couldn't believe they had fallen for his tricks so easily and brought Abel straight to the enemy's lair. Masta pressed his hand against his chest and smiled, saying he was happy to meet her. He said he was an ex-companion of the useless Abel and then revealed his name. The boy pretended to be friendly. Najee and Galil turned to see what had happened. When they saw Masta, they were also surprised, like all three of them. They could ignore that the enemy was right in front of them. Masta clapped and said he appreciated his comrades. The boy was interested in what a comrade would be. He himself answered, "A comrade is someone strong and worthy to fight alongside, one you treat as an equal, and that's mutual." Masta said he would neutralize the useless Abel to test the girls and see what they were capable of. The girls looked around and worriedly glanced at Abel, who was still unconscious. Masta pointed his hand at Layla and said that the girl's logic and judgment were useful. He assured her it would be a waste of her skills to stay with Najee, Galil, and Abel. The girl looked at Master Enzo. He smiled and extended his hand toward her, inviting her to join him. He thought that would be the best option for her. Layla trembled. She was furious because the boy offered her to leave her companions. Masta said that only selected people or among his comrades. Carefully chose all those who could join the ranks of his sect. The boy was confident in his own exclusivity, so he tried to choose his equals. He convinced the girl that he would give her as much money as she wanted. Layla screamed, rejecting. She was very irritated because the boy thought she could be bought with sweet words, money, or anything else, as if it were a terrible and corrupt person. Layla continued and said that Masta attacked her friends. He even looked at the girl in shock, not understanding how she could reject such a generous offer. He was sure anyone would accept something like that. She asked how he could think she would listen to him. After everything he had done, she would never forgive him for what he did to Abel. She didn't need comrades like Masta. Masta decided to erase all the memories with Abel that they had shared together. Demma closed his eyes, lowered his head, and said he was sorry, then snapped his fingers and said if the girl didn't want to join him, then he didn't need her alive. He still hoped the girl didn't care about Abel. He couldn't understand how a useless person like him could have loyal companions. He thought he could find an acolyte as good as her. The guy ordered his lackeys to capture Layla. After the snaps, Galil saw a huge number of people. The lackeys appeared near the XR and Peel tavern, all ready to fight for their master. They all pulled out wooden sticks intending to capture the girls. Masta bent a seal with which he used various spells and elements at the same time. The girls covered themselves, but it didn't work as the magic was too strong. Masta's magic broke through the tavern wall. There was a loud crash followed by the sound of shattering glass. The girls couldn't resist the pressure of the magic and were thrown a great distance. They had no time to do anything, so they fell straight to the ground. Layla fell to the ground right at the feet of the acolytes who were about to hit her. It was very hard for Layla to get up. Then she howled in pain and remained lying on the ground. She couldn't find the strength to resist. Naji saw that the acolytes were going to stab Layla and capture her. Then the girl immediately ran towards Layla, and upon reaching in front of the girl, she started to defend herself with her shield. The acolytes were hitting the shield with all possible weapons, demanding that the girl join them. That way she would have a chance to survive, but the girl continued to resist. Naji kept holding the shield. It was very difficult for her after a strong explosion in the room and the fall to the ground. But she couldn't back down since Layla and Gallo were still unconscious, and the servants were also beginning to approach Gallo, but the girl couldn't recover after a heavy fall. The acolytes kept hitting the shield and demanding that Najee join them. Najee fought with her last strength. She started to look around and saw Abel lying on the ground, still unconscious. The girl didn't know what to do in such a difficult situation. Master was watching Najee, resisting tenaciously until the end. He laughed and said that all of this was useless. He was sure it was impossible to decipher his magic. The guy was confident of his victory. Layla began to recover a little and tried to get up and do something, but nothing worked. The girl was thinking about Abel, who was fallen and defenseless on the ground. She couldn't just let go before losing consciousness again. The last thing the girl remembers is Masta, smiling and reaching out to her. But Masta was surrounded by his servants, so the girl couldn't understand where she was. Abel's body was still wrapped in a massive amount of chains that prevented him from doing anything and breaking free. Right in front of the boy was a huge screen displaying an immense spell formula. The boy kept trying to decipher the spell and free himself, but the decoding was taking too long. He was almost desperate, breathing heavily. A lot of time had passed in that space trying to decipher Masta's spell. It was very difficult for him, but he kept, because he didn't want to be trapped for the rest of his life. Suddenly, Abel heard the flapping of a wing. At first, he thought he had imagined it. Since he had been alone for a long time, he assumed he had gone crazy due to the confusion about how much time had passed. Still, the guy decided to look towards the source of the sound to understand what it was. He lifted his head and opened his eyes in surprise as he expected to find someone in that space. The guy recognized Jamie, the general of the Demon King's army. She was floating in the air right in front of him. The girl put her hands behind her back and looked at him. With a smile at the guy who was trapped in chains, she thought she would find someone interesting in that place. She thought Masta had done a good job since he had chained him up. She was ready to have a little fun with the guy to dispel her boredom. The guy was curious about how the girl managed to invade his space. But before he could fully express his question, Jamie interrupted him. She wondered if the guy wanted to know how she had invaded the spiritual world, anticipating each of his questions. Jamie jumped and said that Abel wasn't very smart. She smiled and laughed because the guy still didn't understand anything. He had no idea what to do. Jamie said that if the guy didn't do anything and waited a little longer, he would lose everything he valued. Jamie waved her hand, and a screen appeared in front of the guy. The guy didn't understand what the girl had done or why he remained chained, and the girl began to move her hand again. When the guy saw the screen completely, he opened his eyes in horror as he saw through it how the acolytes struck the shield of Nage directly, which had protected Lila all this time. He saw that Lila was severely injured. The guy saw that all the girls fought until the end but couldn't win that battle. Since there were only 3 of them, it was an unfair battle as there were many of Masta's servants. Abel was scared for the girls. What worried him the most was that he couldn't help them. Jamie flew closer to the guy and began to whisper in his ear that the girls had sworn to help each other. Abel, due to his obsession with his stupid revenge, They would suffer if they didn't lose their lives, continuing to provoke him to make him angry and drive him crazy. But so far, it hadn't worked. The guy saw how the girls were suffering, shouted, and begged them to stop making him suffer. He saw how Masta's servants kept beating the girls. That was true torture for Abel. He didn't understand why he was destined to suffer. The guy sought revenge but didn't want those with him on the path to suffer. Lala, Galil, and Najee should be safe. Tammy. At that moment, he didn't pay attention to the man's screams and asked if he wanted to save his companions. He told him that in that case, he had to get out as quickly as possible and asked what he was waiting for. Abel began to try to free himself from the chains, shaking his arms and legs while the girl told him to try harder. The man began to scream with all his strength, whether from the hopelessness of the situation or the anger that arose after speaking with the girl. Then he froze and lowered his head, giving up. He made no sound, simply resigned himself to his fate and the fact that he wouldn't be able to help the girls or break free from those chains. Hammy realized that the man had given up. She said she understood everything and repeated that he was useless, continuing to speak negatively about him, and said that nothing had changed in 20 years of imprisonment. She was sure that the man's fate was to be weak and defenseless. Hammy said he had no courage. She reminded him of the school years and how the heroes had used him, and then fled. The girl smiled maliciously and kept provoking, saying that all the man clung to was his revenge. She was sure that was the only reason he was still alive. He thought that revenge was a great motivator. Abel opened his eyes and looked at the girl, horrified. It was as if he had suddenly understood something. The man felt as if something in his body was changing. A dark aura surrounded him. Suddenly, a small flame ignited within him. He said he understood everything. He understood that it was revenge that kept him alive. It was the thought of revenge that constantly moved them and kept them on the path. From the beginning, he didn't need companions. The flame began to burn and inflame even more. He didn't want to make friends or have fun with them. He just wanted to find his abusers and take revenge on them. The man felt the flame inflame even more. He opened his eyes and a black liquid came out of his eyes. The liquid streamed down his face. The man looked terrifying. Abel no longer seemed the same. A dark aura began to envelop him, exactly like the aura of the Demon King. He felt the darkness engulfing him. He was very angry. Jamie watched in awe at the man's transformation. She knew she could say the right words to help ignite the flames in his soul. She was upset with Masta after the conversation with him, so she decided to visit Abel. The girl planned to bring him to the boiling point because she knew that in that state, no one could stop him, nor would anyone dare to oppose him. Suddenly, a dark aura covered everything in the space. From the screen with the magical formulas to the chains that held the man prisoner, absolutely everything was plunged into total darkness. Jamie and the man disappeared. It seemed they had vanished. Suddenly, fairies appeared, flying and illuminating the entire space. They looked like little spirits, circling for a moment, shining in the darkness until they were halted by a huge beast. A massive white serpent with red eyes appeared, opened its mouth, and went straight for the spirits to devour them. It seemed the fairies had no time to do anything as they were swallowed by the giant serpent. At that moment, Abel's hand emerged from the darkness. The man moved his hand abruptly towards Jamie. He used magic directly on the Demon King's general. The girl looked surprised as half of her body disappeared with a single movement from the man. Instead of a belly and chest, there was a void. The girl's body began to fade slowly. Hanny started laughing maniacally. She was amazed by the man's new powers. She never expected the effect of his provocative speeches to be so strong. She was satisfied with the result and hoped to see something entertaining. Jamie kept smiling, even though half of her body had already begun to disappear. The girl realized it was time to finish and leave. She was going to do just that. The black aura continued floating in the air. She was no longer capable of reasoning. She was a terrible and relentless creature that wanted nothing more than the death of her abusers. Revenge was all that mattered to her at that moment. The man was not worried about anything else. Abel lay on the ground, unconscious. The debris of the tavern surrounded him. The others had disappeared. Everyone seemed to have left Abel alone. Suddenly, the man opened his eyes. Looking around, he decided he needed to reach Masta as quickly as possible. Otherwise, he would go mad with rage and the need for revenge. Suddenly, a huge explosion occurred right behind Masta. The tavern's roof crumbled into pieces. Masta didn't rush to turn around. He only heard a loud crash and felt the danger behind him. He knew it was Abel, who was very angry with him for his imprisonment. Masta decided to turn around, doing so very slowly, as he didn't understand how the man could cause such a strong explosion and the destruction of the roof. He looked horrified at the tavern and what was left of it. Abel emerged from the tavern, walking steadily towards Masta. The dark aura enveloped him. His arms and legs were very tense. It was clear the man was extremely angry. He had no intention of talking to Master or forgiving him. When Abel stopped right in front of Master, the man called out to him, trying to understand what had happened to Abel and how he managed to escape from the trap he had set. He was confident in his seal and its durability. Layla watched all of this from the ground. Abel looked terrifying. His entire body was tense. The dark aura wouldn't leave his body, but it seemed to expand even more towards the others. The look on the man's face was intense and malicious. He looked like a predator in front of his prey. Layla lifted her head to look at Abel and realized that gaze. She felt uneasy. The man frightened not only the opponents, but also his companions, because at that moment, she truly remembered a demonic master examining Abel more closely. She also noticed that the man was surrounded by a dark aura, seeming many times stronger than before. Furthermore, the man was tormented by the fact that Abel had still managed to destroy the seal that Masta imposed. She wondered if the man could master the magic of destruction. Everything fit, his aura and the energy emanating from him. Masta was very scared. The fear was palpable among Masta's people. Everyone immediately gathered around their master, preparing for a battle against Abel. All the inhabitants of that settlement were ready to fight for Masta, as they were his devoted disciples. Suddenly, he raised his hand and pointed at Masta, saying that it would be the man's last day alive. Abel was very aggressive. He would not back down from Masta's disciples, and they did not intimidate him. Masta stepped back in fear, even more terrified. He didn't think the situation would reach that point. The man wondered how he and his servants could get Abel out of that state. He understood that if they didn't succeed, everyone would be dead. He needed to come up with a new strategy. Suddenly, all of Masta's servants raised their clubs and ran straight at Abel, who was still standing there. They were all going to attack him while he did nothing. The people hoped they could defeat the man since they were more numerous. Masta's servants didn't have time to do anything, as Abel sprang into action the next second. He formed the seal and managed to pierce through most of them using a spell. Many began to freeze and turn to stone. The man spared no one. He ran, dodging the clubs of Masta's mages, and again used his spell, and everyone in the path of his revenge. Most of Masta's people had no time to react, so they dropped their staffs and tried to stop the petrification, but nothing worked. Abel went over to Layla and began to help her up. She wanted to make sure the girl was all right. She had been lying on the ground for a long time. Naji was not very happy with Abel's appearance because he scared her. At that moment, Layla looked terrified at the man who was dealing with several opponents in a matter of seconds. He simply swept through the crowd and used his spell. The girls didn't understand why the inhabitants didn't hesitate to move forward. Perhaps they really didn't realize how dangerous their opponent was. They couldn't believe they trusted their master. Master, one of the inhabitants. He was standing among his companions who had turned to stone and frozen the subject. He looked at Abel, who was moving at a very high speed, trying to understand what was happening with the subject, and how he could use the Demon King's spell, but the subject didn't have much time to think. Abel grabbed him by the hood's buckle and threw him like this. Abel shot a piercing glance at the subject, then raised his hand showing the spell he was going to use. The resident was very scared, looking at Abel, who was very strong and understood that he now resembled the Demon King a lot. The resident had no time to do anything because Abel turned him to stone. When Abel finished with the last resident of the villa, Masta approached him and said it had been a long time since they last saw each other. He said that 20 years went by very quickly, and unnoticed Masta was also not sure he would see the subject again. He said that Abel fought well for a man with few skills, still considered the subject weak, constantly calling him useless. Masta raised his hand showing the seal. Reminds Abel that they are both spiritual mages. Masta smiles coldly, looking directly into Abel's eyes. He challenges him to a fight. Masta says they need to settle everything personally. He is confident in his victory. Since Abel spent a lot of energy with his lackeys, Masta thought that the battle with them could temper Abel's fury and weaken him a bit. Abel looks at him gloomily. Abel is not going to back down. He is going to finish what he started. Masta forms the seal and directs all his magic straight at Abel, who is still standing. He believes Abel won't be able to withstand several elements and spells at the same time, but Abel extends his hand and creates a shield that protects him from the spells cast. The shield resembles something like a screen where spells normally appear. The subject is not in danger, so he just waits for Masta to finish the attack. Masta is left astonished. He begins to realize that he has probably lost. Abel is standing in front of him during that attack. He was deciphering Masta's spell. The decoding is complete, and Abel himself begins to use the same seal and spells. Masta crosses his arms in front of his body and forms a sphere that protects him from all of Abel's magic. He waits for Abel to finish attacking him to launch a counterattack. He still believes he has hope. The subject did not think that Abel would be able to decipher one of his most powerful spells so quickly. He used it precisely because it was difficult to master, even though the spell itself was powerful. Despite everything, Masta ends up getting hit, and when he turns around, he realizes that common magic is not so effective against him. Masta is going to attack again, but this time using a different technique. Masta has a unique and invincible power that cannot be compared to anything his spiritual magic. The subject believes he can use it to defeat Abel. He raises his hand and pointing at Abel says, "Sealed." Abel begins to back away. His head is bent over, her arms just hanging by her sides. It seemed the spell had worked on the subject and he would now be captured again, just like when he arrived at the settlement. Layla looks at the subject and is horrified. Thinking they were going to imprison him again, she could do nothing but helplessly watch the subject and Masta. Masta, who was beginning to smile, sees chains appear again on the subject's wrists, but Abel immediately raises his hand and breaks them. He doesn't let the spell take effect, then looks at his own hand and clenches it, checking if everything is in order. Masta watches him, not understanding how this is possible. Abel scratches the back of his head and asks what this is all about. He doesn't understand why Masta keeps trying to resist him. Masta extends his hand and, cursing, says that Abel shouldn't come near him. He was very scared. Abel wonders why they tried to chain him again. Masta answers the question with another question. Abel says his spiritual magic is capable of many things and wonders if Masta really forgot. He states that he has become much stronger since the last time they met. Masta raises his hand and looks at it in horror. Realizing that a chain has appeared on his wrist, he gasps in surprise, unable to understand. How could the young man seal his spiritual magic? The acolytes also stare at the chain that appeared on Masta's hand, not comprehending how this is possible. They had never seen their master be outmatched or deceived by anyone. Mage and Layla are also surprised. They understand that Abel has already won and is now going to finish Masta off while he can do nothing. At that moment, Abel raises his hand and closes it into a fist, showing Masta a symbol on the back of his hand. Masta looks at him seriously while the young man shouts, swearing that he did not want to mock the master. Abel was serious and was going to finish what he started. Masta, at that moment, clenches his fist, realizing that by sealing his spiritual magic, Abel guaranteed victory for himself. Now, Masta could not offer resistance since he couldn't use magic, and he was never known for his physical strength. Suddenly, the master receives a punch to the face, his head spinning from the impact. Then he looks at the ground, not prepared for the blow, taking a long time to recover. The hit took him by surprise. Because he was distracted, thinking about the seal on his hand, he had no time to react. His glasses are broken. Abel attacks again, and Masta is thrown a great distance before falling on his back, speaking negatively about Abel. Considering what he did as spiritual magic, just at a slightly different level, the master still wouldn't admit he had lost. And now he would have to endure everything Abel did to him. Masta can't counterattack or get up. While Abel continues to hit him at short intervals, Masta looks at Abel in horror, wondering if it was really easy for Abel to decipher his spell. He was sure his spiritual magic was much stronger, and something seems to hit Masta, who begins to smile. It looked like he had gone crazy from the blows and just kept smiling. His face was covered in new bruises. After a few seconds, Masta says that Abel's spiritual magic is tremendous. He admits that the young man is really strong now. He wanted Abel to be his partner. The master remembers that, since he can remember, what made him special was that the spirits chose him. Everyone bowed before the young man chosen by the spirits. He could only trust those with equivalent strength. He looked at everyone as if they were ants, considering them weak and unworthy. They weren't like Masta. The master remembers that during school days, Abel was also chosen as one of the heroes, which meant he was worthy to be Master's partner. The master didn't immediately understand why Abel had been chosen, but during the Demon King's attack 20 years ago, he felt that Abel had enormous, yet unrevealed potential, and then understood why the young man was chosen. Abel began to hit Masta in the face, first with his right hand, then with his left, repeatedly. He punched several times without stopping. He was furious, so he stopped interrupting the hits and just kept going. Najee and Layla watched in silence. Layla shouted for Abel to stop. She begged him to stop hitting Masta, but the young man didn't hear her and continued. He didn't care about anything except his own revenge against those who condemned him to 20 years in prison. The girl thought that if it were the old Abel, he would be calm enough to listen to his enemies, but now it was as if another person had taken over his body. She couldn't recognize him. He was violent and aggressive. Layla lowered her head and began to cry desperately. She didn't want Abel to become someone so filled with hatred and relentless. She kept pleading for him to stop, but Abel continued hitting without listening to anyone. He delivered the final blow and released Masta, who was already almost unconscious. Masta wasn't moving and couldn't do anything. He was covered in bruises and contusions. His glasses were even more broken. Abel just stood in front of him for a moment and then began to ask questions. He needed to find out where Stark was. Only Master could know, as he and Stark were the only ones who remained. The young man asked where Stark was. He needed to reach the last hero who left him in prison for 20 years. The young man awaited an answer from Masta, as he was sure he knew. Masta was breathing heavily after the blows. For him, it seemed that the end had truly come. He knew he couldn't escape, so he would have to tell Abel everything. He decided to do just that. The master was trying to gather all his strength to tell the location of Stark. He says that it's not he who is imprisoned by the Demon King, but Stark. Masta was still lying on the ground at that moment. Abel formed the seal and launched it at Masta. He was going to use the petrification spell. He no longer needed Masta. Except maybe for revenge, Masta began to be covered by a stone shell. He smiled as he approached the young man. He started begging for mercy, trying to convince him that they were friends. He tried to convince Abel not to do that, but Abel wasn't listening. Masta was completely petrified a second later. Abel lifted his foot and kicked Masta with all his strength. He was very upset by Masta's last words, those words, saying they were friends. Abel looked at the scattered remains of Masta on the ground with disdain. He said he didn't need friends. He had a distorted idea of friendship because of the heroes, who were in the same squad as him 20 years ago. At that moment, Lala called out to the young man, very worried. The guy wasn't in a hurry to turn around. He didn't want the girl to see him like this. He had already made a decision that the girl surely wouldn't like. Naji, Galil, and Lala had been behind him the whole time. Naji was holding Galil in his arms, who was still unconscious, and Lala stood there looking at the man's back. The girls had recovered a bit after the battle, but they were covered in scratches and wounds. Abel closed his eyes and began to remember everything that had happened during his long journey. For some reason, it was at that moment when he had already decided to let them go that he started to remember several moments. He remembered how Lala had said she would go with him and how determined she was. At that moment, the girl was full of enthusiasm, which won over the young man. He also liked the fact that she didn't want to leave him alone. Abel remembered how Galil joined his team to help him with his revenge. He didn't want to reject her offer, as Abel loved animals. The protagonist remembered how each one promised to be with him until victory over the demon. He remembered the actual battle for the fortress, where the girl showed that she knew how to work well with him as a team. Abel remembered how they all fought together against monsters, how they protected each other. It was then that he realized what comrades should really be. He could count on them. The last memory of the young man was of Layla smiling at him. She was the first person to find him after 20 years in prison and the first companion to show what being a friend should be. The young man was happy while he was in that team, but he thought he could no longer travel with them. He remembered the former companions who constantly mocked him but still decided to leave. He turned around and smiling said they would see each other again. He was sure he could deal with Stark and that he would see Layla again. Layla opened her eyes realizing he was about to leave and abandon them. She couldn't believe that Abel had made such a decision. She couldn't let him go, but it was already too late. The protagonist made a quick movement and stood up, disappearing, leaving Najee, Layla, and Galil. He thought it would be better for both him and them. I didn't intend to return until I defeated Star. Layla fell to her knees in despair. Najee approached her to try to calm her down. He had left, so she started to cry. She couldn't believe that the young man had just walked away. Galil. She began to recover. She realizes that Layla is crying and needs her, trying to calm her down. There's complete silence in the street. Layla understands that the fight is over and Abel is gone.